Do you even know how to shop online? Because I didn't until I found out about Piggy. So Piggy searches the entire internet to find me the best deals every time, and I'll show you how to join. All you have to do is go to joinpiggy.com, click add to Chrome, click add to Chrome again, and click add extension, and you're all set. In the top right corner, you're going to see this nice classy little P, and that's how you know that you're ready to shop online. So let me show you how it works. All you have to do is go to your favorite online.
It is now almost midnight, and this man's car is just nowhere in sight, and he keeps pressing me to help him. And it was at this point that I make my first good decision during this whole situation and begin to back up to my truck as nonchalantly as possible. I jump in and drive off as quickly as possible as this man is now screaming at me. The car that was behind us starts to follow, and after a little while I decide to make 4 right turns, and after I feel that they weren't following us, I eventually take her home. The road the guy flagged us down on was how I actually got home as well, and being afraid to go back down that road, I had to go the long way that added a good bit of time to my ride. I didn't get home till well after my parents wanted me back, and I explained what happened to my parents the next morning at breakfast, and my dad rightfully chewed me out for putting Stacy in that situation. It was a sketchy moment for sure, and something that I'll never repeat. I was around 14 years old when this took place. We had just moved to my grandmother's neighborhood like 3 weeks prior. I was extremely familiar with this place as I'd visited them every weekend. And down the road a bit was a small pond that was in the middle of the next neighborhood over. I would regularly go down there to fish as well, as my dad's friend owned the property where the pond was at. He had a very nice house with a little gazebo that protruded out of the water a little bit. He lived right near the small dam at the end of the lake, and the dam was about 8 feet high, I'd say, and on the side that wasn't facing the lake, there was a 50-foot concrete slope that went into the woods below. So it was a Friday night in January, and me being the avid fisherman I was getting ready for a trip down there the next morning. I went to bed kind of early with my dog and fishing buddy, Angel. She's a Jack Russell Rat Terrier mix, and I had her since I was about 6 years old. A man's best friend for sure. But once we got into bed, I just couldn't sleep for some reason, and I just kind of tossed and turned. I finally dozed off for about an hour, I suppose, but woke up for no apparent reason again and couldn't go back to sleep. I looked at my phone, and it was about 1:30 in the morning, and after a short thought, I decided to just go down to the pond and start fishing. I grabbed my fishing pole, tackle box, my thermos, and Angel's leash, and we started walking down to the pond. You might think that I was pretty crazy for going fishing in 20 degrees Fahrenheit, but I was really into fishing. And besides, I was having great luck fishing down there at night recently, so I wanted to go and push my luck. It was a short walk to get to the lake, but I had to walk around it to the far side where I fished, which was another half mile or so. It was really foggy that night as well, but I could see pretty well still because it was a full, or almost full, moon that night. It was extremely quiet too. Usually the road that I was walking on is very busy at all hours, but it was just too cold for anyone to be out that night. We made it to my dad's friend's house, and we walked down to the gazebo, and I sit my things down and take a drink of hot chocolate before I start getting my line ready for the water. Angel also found a small place in between the wooden benches to lay down. Now, this next part may seem a bit unimportant, but please just bear with me because it is. So, once I got my fishing pole rigged up, I casted it out and sat it down to wait for a bit. My fishing reel has a setting to where if a fish tugs on the line, it makes a really loud clicking noise to let you know that you have a bite. Well, that's the setting that I put it out to, and I set it down and took a look around. It was about 2:30 a.m, give or take at this point. I look over to the left at the houses. I look over to the right towards the dam, which was about 40 feet from where I was. It was still very quiet, and I continued to look around the area, just kind of taking in the moonlit water. But then, suddenly, I see something out of the corner of my eye to my right. There, by the dam, I see a white blob walking on all fours, looking as if it's smelling the ground or something. It looked like a white dog from where I was, and I didn't want Angel to see it, so I picked a leash up and kept an eye on the thing. At this point, I still thought it was a dog, and I wasn't scared in the least bit. But then it made its way up to the wall dam, and then it stood up on two legs, which was when I realized that this was no dog. I crouched down beside the wooden bench where Angel was lying, grabbed her up, and faced her away from the creature. The thing didn't see me, and I was going to do my damnedest to make sure it never did. I intensively watched it as it looked around the area and then proceeded to jump up onto the 8-foot-tall dam effortlessly, almost as if it floated or something. And then it did something really strange. Its pale white skin started glowing, almost like a firefly. I could see the bluish-colored veins in its back and calf muscles, and this thoroughly freaked me out. Then it turned around to where I could see its face. It was about 3.5 feet tall, had a short torso, long skinny legs and arms, a wide head, almost oval-shaped I suppose, large ears, a large mouth with many small teeth and huge eyes that were yellowish-orange in colour. And on top of that, I have to repeat that it was glowing. I was nearly hyperventilating, trying to control my breathing, hoping that this thing wouldn't hear me. Angel, too, was now aware of its presence, and the hair on her neck stood up as she started growling and struggling to get out of my arms. I kept watching it, terrified to move, and it didn't do anything when it got up to the top of the dam. It just kind of squatted down and looked as though it was examining something in its hands. After a few minutes of watching it, I'd worked up the idea to just go back the way I came, and once I got to the road, just run as fast as I can home. Angel was growing increasingly aggressive and trying to see the creature, but I kept her buried in my big winter jacket the best that I could. I decided to just leave my stuff there and come back to get it the next day, and I slowly stood up, and just as I was about to start walking around the gazebo, my fishing pole started making a really loud zing sound. And I mean, of all the times, now I get a fish bite. My attention went straight back to the creature, which was now frantically looking around for the source of the noise. In my panic, I forgot to keep Angel covered up, and she saw the creature for the first time. She started barking like I've never heard her bark before, as if she was in terror or something. And that, I must admit, scared me. The creature then saw us there, and it bent down as if it were about to start running towards us. I tried to take a step back and start running, but I slipped on the cold, hard ground. I landed on my side and looked at the creature. Thankfully, it hadn't started to chase us, but it let out the most disturbing scream that I've ever heard. The only way I can describe it is if it sounded like a woman screaming, but backwards, if that makes sense. It then jumped from the dam into the woods about 100 feet away and faded as it landed. I'm ashamed to admit that I was in tears now, and my fight or flight kicked in. I grabbed Angel and I ran as fast as I could, all the way up to the door of my house. Too afraid to look back and see if it was behind me, I eventually got home, and I don't really remember what happened till the next day. I must have passed out or something, because all I remember is it seeming like a dream. But the next day, I went to go and get my gear from the gazebo, and it all was still there, so it definitely wasn't a dream. I didn't go back to the pond, even during the day, for at least a few years. I told my mum and my dad the story months later, and while they do believe me, I still wonder what that creature actually was. Please let me know your thoughts on this, because honestly, I don't know what to think. Not even half an hour ago, I just had one of the freakiest paranormal experiences that I've had in a long time. To give you guys some backstory, I live in an apartment attached to a funeral home. I'm a mortuary science student, and I work for this funeral home to get experience while I'm in school to be a mortician. The funeral home happened to have a vacant apartment set privately in the back that I just couldn't possibly turn down because I just moved away from home for this school and I needed an inexpensive place to live. But since the day I moved in, I've been having these very notable paranormal experiences. For a couple of months, I just kept it to myself, not wanting to seem like I was feeding into some spooky funeral home stigma or making it up. But Eventually, I was experiencing enough that I had to bring it up with a coworker of mine, and she confirmed that she and a few other employees had seen and heard the same things I have. That being said, it's not news to any of us that the place is haunted, if that's what you can call it. So today, after I got home from classes and went home, I was feeling extremely uneasy. My apartment felt just extra dark, and I felt sort of jumpy, I suppose. I was standing in my bathroom braiding my hair, and one of my co-workers texted me. She said that she has a weird feeling and asks me to go and check the front doors of the funeral home to make sure that they're locked. I read her text as I braided my hair, and her next message pops up, and it says, "I'm 99% sure I locked it, but I just have a nagging feeling about something." I tell her that I'd go and check, and I finished braiding my hair and slipped on my shoes and walked to the door of my apartment that opens up into the back of the funeral home. The lights are off, and I don't bother turning them on, as the motion sensor in the hallway always kicks on by themselves. I made my way to the front lobby, which was dark, not counting the light through the front door windows. I walked to the front doors and pushed. And sure enough, both of them are unlocked. At that moment, I had a really heavy feeling like someone was behind me or watching me as well. I kept turning around to look, but standing by the light at the doors and looking into the dark lobby made it almost impossible to see. Eventually, I just hurried up and locked the doors and made my way back through the lobby, and as I was about to enter the hallway, I hear a little girl giggling. I stopped dead in my tracks for a moment, because just at the end of her giggling, it sounded like it was coming from behind a door not 6 feet away from me. At this, I got chills on my entire body, and I just hightailed it back into the lit hallway and into my doorway. I locked the door behind me and immediately heard a loud bang from a room in the funeral home. I have no idea what it was, but it was very loud, and I wasn't about to go and check it, that's for sure. As I was standing there, pretty much crapping my pants, I texted my coworker back saying the doors were both unlocked. And as I'm typing in my story of what happened, she says, "I don't know, man. I've been getting weird vibes in there all day." It had been a few weeks since I'd had anything strange happen, but now I was extremely on edge. There are two spirits, or entities, or whatever you call them, that myself as well as 3 other co-workers have all seen. One of them is of a little girl, and she looks maybe 8 years old. She's slightly taller than average, and she shows herself so briefly that you wonder if you even saw it. I would almost say that she looks 10, but when we hear her giggle, she sounds like a young girl of maybe 6 years old. The other is a tall, shadow-like man who wears a long black coat and a black hat, and he is an entirely different story. I'm chilled in here right now because some days in here feel just weirder than others, and tonight feels like the kind where I probably won't get any sleep. I feel so anxious right now because usually these things happen in waves, so I feel like I'm just waiting for the next thing to happen. Anyway, I've been so amazed at all the feedback that I've gotten for this story that I thought that I should share more of what I've experienced here. A lot of people have actually asked me that I share more, so here's some of them. The very day I moved in, I was trying to clean and dust everything as I was unpacking. I was listening to music and polishing one of my end tables when something caught my eye. I glanced up towards my hallway where the bathroom is located and briefly saw what looked like a little girl peeking at me from behind the door frame. I did a double take, not sure what I was seeing, and when I did, she was gone. I paused my music and kind of stood there with a stupid look on my face, I'm guessing. And then I heard a soft rustling noise from the bathroom, like the sound of maybe the shower curtain or something. I walked over to the bathroom and peeked in, but of course there was nothing there. My first few nights there were actually pretty normal after that too. Some strange noises like bumps on the wall, knocking and brushing noises, but I attributed all of that to the fact that I was in a new place and those noises were probably normal in the building. One night, though, I was taking a shower, minding my own business, when I felt an ice-cold air on my back. I didn't have the air on at this time, and there were no windows in my bathroom that could cause a draft like that. But I felt immediately uneasy and peeked out behind my shower curtain to see that everything was normal. I went back to showering and tried to pretend like nothing happened. But as I was facing the water, my towel that was draped up over the curtain rod fell to the floor. I jumped and whipped around quickly, peeking behind the curtain again, and nothing. I was pretty shaken though now, and I picked up my towel and draped it back over the rod. I tried to hurry up and finish my shower, but just as I was about to turn off the water, I hear my bathroom door click. In absolute fear and panic, and ready to nakedly fight someone, I ripped off the curtain to see my door slowly opening. I stood there and watched until it slowly reached the doorstop. I said something along the lines of, "Holy crap," through tears and fumbled for my towel and ran just straight out of my bathroom. I got dressed and left for the rest of the day and didn't come back until about 9 that night. Nothing happened for the rest of that evening, and after that, things were pretty quiet for a little while at least. Around 2 weeks later, it was a little after midnight, and I was doing laundry that night. My washer and dryer are in the actual prep room where we embalm people, so to do laundry, I'd have to go back into the hallway of the funeral home. I had just put in a load of washing and was walking back to my apartment door at the very end of the hallway when I heard a door latch. Kind of like the door was closed in the frame, but not latched, if that makes sense. It made me jump, and I turned around, and at the end of the hallway, I saw a really tall shadow man. Now, the owner of the funeral home was a big man who wears a long black coat in the winter and has this thick black cowboy hat sort of thing that he wears. So, for a split second, I thought maybe it was my boss who had come in for something. But it definitely wasn't. It felt like a good 2 to 3 seconds that I watched him cross the end of the hallway, and then he just disappeared into thin air, almost as I was focusing on him. I mentioned in my original story that there are motion sensor lights in this hallway, and these lights were all on during this encounter. He was tall and really big. He had a hat that was similar to the one my boss wears and was black from completely top to the bottom, like a really, really opaque shadow. Needless to say, I almost crapped myself again, and I bolted back to my apartment and locked the door. I was so scared and just in so much disbelief that I was actually lightheaded and had to sit down. I still didn't mention him or the little girl that I saw to anyone I work with. But one day, when I came home from class, I noticed my microwave time had changed to military time. I didn't think anything of it, and I messed with the settings, switching it back. The next night I was working, cleaning one of the lounges, and I noticed that the time on the microwave in there was on military time too. At that point, I honestly figured that maybe there was a power outage that day, and when the microwaves kicked back on, they just went wonky and switched to military time. This was until the next day, which was my day off. I slept in and I lounged in my bed for like an hour, and one of my best friends called me. We'd been talking for about 20 minutes, and I was like, alright, I should probably get up and do something, I suppose. And I glanced to see what time it is, and my alarm clock was on military time. Now, my alarm clock is a cheap battery-operated alarm that doesn't even plug into a wall. I've had it for about 4 years, and I'd never seen it switch to military time, and I just went silent on the phone and stared at the clock, trying to find some sort of logical explanation for this. The microwave kind of made sense at first, but then with my alarm clock, I just couldn't shake the feeling that it all meant something. It wasn't long after that, too, is when things got considerably spookier. So, probably about 3 days later, I suppose, I was coming back home one afternoon from classes. I came right in and threw my keys and my purse onto the kitchen table, and then turned my back to the table to plug the sink and start running water to do my dishes. But my dishes were being piled up, and I swore to myself that I'd do them first thing when I got home. Anyway, I was letting the sink fill and turned to get my keys and purse from the kitchen table and put them on the end table by my door, which is where I always place them so I don't forget them while I'm running out the door at like 3 a.m. death calls. And my purse was there, but my keys weren't. And I had just come in and threw them on the table. I knew that. It only took a few seconds to get the sink ready, so I knew they just didn't get up and walk away. But bewildered, I started looking under the table and on the floor, patting my pockets trying to find my keys, and I just put them there. Frustrated though, I go to plop down on my couch and ponder if I'm just going crazy. I have a heavy quilt on my couch, and when I went to lift it up and sit down, right there were my keys. Now, I didn't go anywhere near my couch when I came in. I'm 100% positive that I put my keys on the table next to my purse when I came in, and there was no reason that they should be under that quilt. But that wasn't even the weirdest part. On my keyring, I have my parents' house key and my car key on the main key rings, and a second key ring is attached to that one with my apartment door keys on it. And the key ring with the apartment keys on it was stretched and bent as if someone had tried to rip the key ring straight off the other one. But the key rings aren't flimsy bendy ones either. I mean, I could hardly open them enough to lock key rings together when I put them on, and it would have taken some serious force to completely pull open the key ring like that. I actually do have a picture of my keys somewhere in my laptop that I'll try and locate and send to you guys later so that you guys can see what I mean. But anyway, obviously my stomach dropped through my butt when I saw my keys were just all messed up under the blanket like that. I almost didn't even believe if I was seeing it all correctly, and I felt like I was going crazy. At this point, I was feeling like I should at least vent to someone about what was going on. So, night or two after that, I was at a working visitation with an older woman who was worked for the boss for a long time. She's my favourite co-worker, as she's easy to talk to and reminds me of my grandma or something like that. And she asked me how I was getting settled in the apartment and if I was enjoying it. I told her how much I loved my apartment, but there were some weird things that just didn't make sense happening. She asked what I meant, and I honestly didn't want to say it because, well, I didn't want her to think that I was crazy or trying to pull the wool over her eyes or something. After my hesitation, I just asked if she thought the funeral home was haunted. She explained to me that she had had some strange experiences here as well as a couple of others that I work with too. They've all heard loud screaming and moaning from time to time in the prep room. They've heard giggling, unexplained doors opening and slamming, etc. But what upset me the most was that she told me about a tall black man with a hat that she had seen in the back hallway a couple of times. And at that point, I word vomited and told her everything that had happened since I moved in. And that was the night that I felt like it was confirmed to me that there was something or things here. I remember I honestly felt like vomiting at one point because I was so scared, but at least I knew that I wasn't crazy, right? Strangely enough, a few weeks after that, nothing really big happened. I mean, sure, I would always hear the strange noises at night. It's not uncommon to hear a door open and close by itself somewhere in the funeral home, and I've also heard people talking, hear cots sliding around on the floor, and the same moans and screams my co-workers have all heard. But this has almost all become normal to me, so although it's freaky, it's bothering me directly, and I could live with that. At least for a little while, I suppose. Because, once again, things picked up one day when I was in my bedroom putting clothes away. I was sitting on my floor folding a mountain of laundry when I heard a loud, clear as day sound of a man clearing his throat in my living room. The kind that you'd hear when you try to get someone's attention. It was so clear and real that I honestly didn't even think it was a ghost at first. I was confused for a moment, thinking that maybe my boss had come in to speak to me, but surely he'd knock. I mean, nobody would ever just walk in here. So I hopped up and stepped into my living room, and as you can guess, there was nobody there. I peered around the corner to see if anyone was in my bathroom, but there was no one. The realization eventually set in that I was alone, and my stomach sort of dropped at that point. But honestly, I was so used to so much activity that after a few minutes of pacing around in disbelief, I just kind of shook it off and went back to folding laundry. In the most recent weeks, the most I've experienced are the normal sounds and voices and bumps in the night that I always hear. One night, though, a couple of random lights and my TV all shut off at once unexpectedly, and I had to go into the funeral home utility room to flip the switches in the breaker box. I noticed that when I have someone over and start telling them about these things, the lights or the TV will just shut off. A friend of mine has actually experienced this with me on 3 different occasions, in fact. And that pretty much catches me up to the original story that I shared with you guys. I'm not gonna lie, guys, it's been an absolute ride being here. Some nights it's nothing, and other nights I sleep with the blankets over my head. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to this. It actually sort of feels therapeutic to share it with all of you guys, and I never guessed that so many people would be interested in my story. And so, thank you to everyone for being so cool and listening, even if you don't believe. This is a bit of a weird one, and I doubt anyone will believe this, and that's fine, but an incident in a barn made the story real for a lot of people. Anyway, about 5 years after we built our house, I started seeing things in the basement. I'd see small creatures peeking out from behind furniture, and once even had a bat fly directly out of the bathroom at my face and then just disappear in mid-flight. But then, the guy showed up. I don't remember the first time I saw him, but I remember I'd walk into the basement at night and he'd just be there in the corner. He was really tall, very white, dressed in a longish coat and a black hat. He was sometimes holding what I think was a lantern. Basically, he looked like if a normal, very pale person put on the Babadook's clothes. He never did anything, he just kind of stood there and looked at you with this really serious and morose expression and then faded away into nothing or would disappear if you blinked or looked away. I never really told anyone, other than my mum, who is a firm believer in the paranormal, much more so than even me. But well, this one night, my punk band practiced in the garage and we were all like 14 or 15 maybe. My drummer was sleeping over and my parents were at a casino for the night. We crashed out on opposite sides of the wraparound couch in the basement after playing some video games, and then I woke up at around 3 a.m. And the drummer was gone. The back doors going into the backyard were wide open and all of the lights were on. I was obviously pretty freaked out. I looked over all the house and I couldn't find him anywhere. But then I noticed my new flip phone had moved. Sure enough, there was a call to a number that I didn't recognize. I figured that he must have gotten sick or something and had his parents come to get him. The next day I called him and he just was losing his mind. Apparently, he woke up, saw the tall guy in the corner, but said the guy put his arms out and lunged at him. He grabbed my phone, ran outside, and called his mum to pick him up. He came back in once a lot of lights were back on and put my phone back and then ran out and didn't even close the doors. So, now it got around school that my house is haunted. Fast forward a few years though, and the elderly lady who lived across the street had passed away, and the family were doing showings of the house to try and sell it. They had a huge barn behind the house as well as a field, and this family went into the barn and their little girl, maybe 5 or 7, pointed to a corner of the barn and described the exact guy from my basement. She apparently could see him, but nobody else could. She had never been on the property before, yet she saw the exact same thing. And that was the last that I ever heard or saw of him again. This was about 2 years ago, so I was around 16 or 17. It should also be noted too that I'm a 5 foot tall girl and my twin sister is just 2 inches taller than me, so we're relatively small. It was a weekend night and my sister and I were left alone since my mum and stepdad and little brother left to go to a party. My sister was in her room and I was in the living room watching TV, so I'm right next to the front door. I hear a knock about a minute after my family had just left, and I go to open it since I assume my family may have forgotten something important and return to go and get whatever item it was. Now, because I am small, I actually can't peek through the peephole even on tippy toes. If I look through the blinds though, whoever is outside would be able to tell because we have those wooden blinds where all of them shift to whichever direction if you move one. But I didn't think about doing either of those things since I did think it was a family member, so when I opened the door, there was a woman there. I didn't know her, and she seemed to be in her early 20s, had dark hair, and was a bit taller than me and my sister, but that was all I could make out since we didn't have the light at our front door and just the moonlight that was barely there. She proceeded to ask if there was a certain someone that lived here, and I told her no because I knew no one of that name. The whole thing was a bit creepy, I must admit. She wore dark clothing, she spoke in a really low voice, and kept looking at the screen door handle as if she was waiting for me to open it. I was thankful that that separated us, and she said her goodbyes and left, and I closed and locked the doors. I decided to go to the other side of my house where the lights were off, and she wouldn't be able to see if I opened the blinds of that window, and I see her in the driveway just looking at my house while on the phone with someone. Stayed there for a good 3 minutes after the call ended, and then she just left. Okay, I was creeped out, and I told my little sister, who watched TV with me in the living room after that. About 15 minutes go by, and we hear a knock on the window. We got scared until we heard my aunt's voice, so we opened the door. She came to return something, I believe, and noticed how spooked we were, so we told her what happened, and she told us to get in her car and we'll get to Starbucks to make us feel better. Sure enough, it did the trick, and she dropped us off at our house, and didn't leave for about 5 minutes until we got the house and everything locked up. And then, soon after that, she left. Another knock was heard about 3 minutes later, and I assumed my aunt realized that she forgot to give back whatever item she originally was going to drop off, and I opened the door without even checking who it was, and standing in front of me was this huge guy. He was at least 6'4" and maybe like 250 pounds, and just overall I knew that he would 100% be able to take me and my sister down without a fight, no sweat. He asked for the same man the woman earlier asked for, and I told him that I don't know who that is and he didn't live here. He also looked at the screen door handle as if he were waiting for me to open it as well, and then just left. My sister and I were pretty terrified because there was no way that that was a coincidence. I look out through the blinds again, and in the middle of the driveway between our cars, I saw the man talking to the same woman who was here earlier. But they talked for 5 minutes and went walking to their car, which was parked all the way on the other side of the road and 2 houses down. And it was creepy because we had plenty of parking space in front of or near our house. My sister and I triple-checked every door and window was locked, put our dog inside, and just waited for our family to come home soon. My family soon came home from the party, and we told them what happened more in depth. We had actually called them after the guy came, but party was about an hour away without all the traffic, so there wasn't much that they could do. They were creeped out as well, though, and my sister and my stepdad are certain that whoever used to live in our house was some sort of a drug dealer or something illegal like that, and he has some people very angry at him and have come to our house thinking that he still lives there, but also believe that maybe they were a part of whatever the guy did and won't hesitate to come after us. It's been this way ever since we moved in about 4 years ago. Strange people just arriving at our house and weird occurrences and hearing weird things. Anyway, everything seems to have calmed down a bit for at least a little while here, so I guess we'll just see how it goes. The year is 2016, and it's the last day of school. After school, which ended at around 12 a.m, my mother, brother, stepdad and I left for the south of France. My stepdad had a vacation home there, so we left around 2 p.m. and braced ourselves for a really long drive. I was cheery though, and so was everyone in the car. We listened to music and played some road trip games, kind of like those ones where you need to come up with the name of an animal, which should start with the last letter of an animal used by the previous person. You get what I mean, just stupid little games. Either way though, we're 5 hours into the drive, about halfway in I'd say, and we're having dinner in a busy parking lot when suddenly my mother receives a phone call. My mother asks who's on the phone, since the number calling her was one she didn't recognize, and a French-speaking woman on the other side of the phone told my mother that she had a present for her and that she wanted to know our own current address. The woman claimed to have tried to drop it off at our old address since she thought that my mother still lived there, but the new owners told her that my mother had actually moved and that they couldn't help the woman. It wasn't even our former address too, but our former one since we moved 2 times on a short span of time. My mother, who wasn't very attentive because she was so relaxed and enjoying the trip, unknowingly gave away our then current address. After ending the call though, she explained to my stepdad, my brother and I what the call was about, and we instantly started asking questions. I mean, why would a person have a present for her? How did she get my mother's number? And why would she ask about our address? And why did the woman speak French even though they don't speak French where we live? And it was at this point that my mother's face turned pale, and so did mine. We were all really creeped out and obviously nervous. My mother had given this woman our address. We were hundreds of kilometers away from our house, and we just couldn't do anything. After dinner, my mother went to recharge her phone inside the building that stood next to the parking lot. And it wasn't even a parking lot, more like a stop for tourists, but the building had shops and restaurants in it. And it was there that my mother reached out to the people who bought our former house. But they confirmed too that a few hours before my mother called them, a woman did indeed come by and ask them about my mother. And they also said that this wasn't someone that worked for a delivery service or anything. According to the people that my mother had called, the woman didn't have a specialized vehicle with a logo on it, and nor did she wear any kind of uniform. The woman was also older, but not that old, but they estimated her to be in her late 40s. My mother also asked them if they had given this woman a phone number, which they didn't. My mother ended the call, and we had even more questions now. At this point, all of us were severely creeped out, though. We got back into the car and continued our drive, and this part, however, wasn't as cheerful and carefree as the first one. All four of us had a discussion on what we should do next, and even why my mother went as far as actually giving our address to this person. My stepdad called our neighbour and asked him to keep an eye on our property, but our house was on the top of a hill and it was rather isolated. Our neighbour had to go over to our house and circle around the property a couple of times, and at this point, it was also getting pretty dark, so it was hard to see. My mother called one of our close friends to go and take a look at our home, and I could hear the stress in her voice as she called him. That friend did go over after he received the call, and he drove to our home. He said that when he arrived, the porch looked normal and that all the lights in our house appeared to be out. My mother's friend and our neighbour actually ran into one another and both scared the crap out of each other, but once they both came to the conclusion that it was safe, they both just went back home. After a while, though, our neighbour texted my stepdad that he mentioned what happened to his son, who happened to be a policeman. He informed his colleagues, who were doing a nighttime patrol in our neighbourhood anyway, and they said they'd check every few hours just to see what was going on. The police never saw anyone break in that night, but they did say that around 11:30 at night, they saw a car drive onto the road that led to our house. Now, no one would ever drive down this driveway, unless they were visiting, and besides the handful amount of the people who live there. And according to the people who patrolled around our neighbourhood that night, though the car didn't stay long and they never saw anyone get out of it, the car did actually show up. I'm really glad we didn't think about what happened all vacation long, because that would have been a total downer, but still, the whole situation was just really weird and kind of sketchy. We never did hear anything from this woman again, and we didn't receive any presents. I'm also very glad that we moved out later that year, because who knows who that person was and what they wanted. I work in a care home, a very, very posh one in fact. It costs about £1,200 per week to live here, so, as you can imagine, very posh. It has 2 floors and 4 suites, 2 on each floor and either side of the building, and it's very large. Tonight I've been working downstairs, and I am not a fan of downstairs. I was in the kitchenette on one of the suites. One of our jobs is to clean the kitchens, as during the day the cleaners can't do it because of safety risks and whatnot. I had my back to the door, and I had this weird feeling that someone was in the doorway or was walking to and from one end of the wall or whatever. I don't know how to describe it, but it was a weird feeling. I was putting cutlery away, and I felt as if someone had just very, very gently pushed up against my back, and I could feel my uniform move. I turn around and expect to see my co-worker, but nothing. It's just me alone in a big dining room or kitchenette, and the lights in the hallway were off. And the rest of the time that I was in there, it felt like someone was literally stood right behind me watching me work, and I did not like that at all. I also had an odd experience down at the other end of the building in the other suite too. I was in the kitchenette dining room, and I'd been cleaning. I had my back to the door, which was on the very end of the dining room, and very, very loudly, someone began to whistle a nursery rhyme in the corridor. Everyone was asleep though, No alarms had gone off to say someone had gotten out of bed as well. The other member of the staff was having a cigarette outside, so it was just me downstairs. I asked another colleague, and she said that she's heard the whistling down there before, but everyone's asleep at midnight, and no one down there can actually whistle anyway. I do get an odd feeling here on the ground floor, but it's always around midnight to 3 a.m. It constantly feels like just somebody else is running up and down the corridors or rushing around you. It makes you feel kind of dizzy and sick sometimes too. Sorry about my rambling, but this helps me keep awake on these shifts, and I just thought it would be something good to share and to get ideas. Especially because some of the day staff even say that this place creeps them out too. And that is during the day. This happened to me when I was about 12 or 13, I'd say, and I had somewhat forgotten about it until recently. So one day I was walking home from school when I noticed that I had a voicemail on my phone. This was strange because I would never get voicemails, but I thought that perhaps it was just someone who had left a blank message after staying on the call for too long or something. I put my headphones in as I plodded along and listened to the voicemail, and it was blank. But it went on for quite some time, like someone had wanted to say something but just ended up hanging up. So that's just what I thought, an accident. Later that night, as I was enchanted by my phone, I got another voicemail though. I thought that this was strange, as I never got a call in the first place, so I listened once again, and once again it was blank. However, you could tell someone was there holding the phone up to their face. This seemed to go on for weeks too, and it seemed to get worse day by day. I would come out of school and end up having like 6 voicemails. I would listen to the first 5 seconds and delete them if they hadn't said anything by then, and at this point I started to get a little bit paranoid. My childlike brain conjuring up the worst thoughts. One of my friends may have been playing a prank on me, and I thought it was getting annoying. I asked around, and everyone denied it. But I was certain that I would catch them. Until a week later, that is. I can't exactly remember what this voicemail was about, but I do remember it sounded like a grown man who was extremely angry. He would call me all sorts of names, and I was stupid because I didn't tell anyone. I was embarrassed, and I began questioning myself had I done something wrong. But day after day, I would get threats, to the point where I no longer wanted to go to school. I didn't even want to leave my house. The last voicemail was once again this man yelling too, heavily breathing, and then he said something that made my head spin. "I'm coming to get you." I remember sitting with my back against my bedroom door as if someone was about to kick it down right there and then. I ran into my parents' room and told them that I needed a new number because I was getting weird voicemails. I told them that I deleted them all and that it was bothering me, but obviously they had the wrong number. And so I got a new number and no more voicemails. A couple of days and nothing, and I decided that I wanted to go and see my friends at our hangout. We were all a bunch of goth kids, and this was the one spot where everyone would be. Even then, I tended to stick out though, because I was already wearing heavy makeup and had teased hair, and you could probably spot me from a mile off if I'm being honest. So I get on the train when a man starts to walk the full distance down just to come up to me. He says hi and then said that he liked my style. I felt like I knew him from somewhere because something just felt similar about him, but I just couldn't place it where it was from. And that was when the question started. "How old are you?" "I'm 29. "Oh, you're 13, right?" I hadn't answered, but I thought that he was just quirky and guessing, so I said yes. He said, "Where do you go to school?" "Oh, you go here, right?" Well, once again, I hadn't even answered, and I felt odd. I just lied, though, when I told him that I used to go there, but I'd be going to a different school now. And then he said, "So, where are you going today? Are you seeing anyone?" And I said that I was meeting a bunch of friends, but didn't answer the where I was going part. I started to look away. I no longer wanted to make eye contact with him. He ducks, like straight up bends over and tilts his head just to make eye contact with me. I look a different direction, and he steps right in front of me, forcing me to look at him again. It wasn't even his body, he just kind of moved his face to wherever my eyes would go. I wasn't even speaking now, and it was just a blur of him asking me questions and then answering them himself. He seemed to know everything about me, even all the stores or areas I had visited in the past month. Adults all around me start to stare, and he seems to panic. And then he says, "There's a party going on at the library. Want to come?" Obviously, I decline and he gets off. I later found out too that near this library are the dingiest alleyways and car parks probably in the entire city. But months pass and I hear nothing. A trend goes around about YouTubers Googling their names and seeing what pops up though, and I decided it would be fun to do that myself, so I go ahead and I Google my username that I used online back then, expecting to see nothing. Just a bunch of junk on the web pages. So I go into images and see a few months of old selfies of me, and I click on it and it leads to a website that I didn't know. The photo doesn't appear to be on the site and its layout looks incredibly old. All there is my username and then a download link called Map. I didn't want to download it in case there was some sort of tracking virus on it or something, and, well, that's what I first thought of when I first saw it. I panicked, closed everything, and nothing seemed to happen ever again. I also happened to get some homeschooling after this as well, which did help. It was a very bizarre thing that happened to me, and I still don't know really what to make of it. And I still wonder what was on that file to this day. Four years ago, me and my best friend decided to go to a tiny house in the woods that her grandpa owned and stay for a few days. The place was completely isolated, the road was really far away, and there were barely any houses around. But when we used to take walks during the daytime, the first house that we saw was 30 minutes away, in fact, from the one that we were currently staying in. Her grandparents' house was a one-story only. There was one tiny bathroom, and the kitchen was in the living area and one bedroom. So, but one night I asked her to keep me company while I smoked a cigarette outside on the gazebo. She agreed, and before we went outside, we locked the front door even though the gazebo was right next to the house and we could easily see if someone tried to get inside. We stayed a little longer outside because we got carried away in our conversation when, all of a sudden, we hear something hit the roof of the gazebo loudly. It was so loud that it honestly sounded like a body just fell from the sky and onto the roof. We obviously froze, and none of us would even dare to breathe. We just kind of looked at each other. I know that my best friend in these types of situations goes into full panic mode, screaming and running, so before she even managed to scream, I told her quietly to not make a sound and just grab a phone and go inside the house. We get up and walk away from the gazebo to the front door, and I look to see if there's something up there, but there's nothing. But we get to the front door, and guess what? The door is open, almost halfway open. At this point, my best friend starts jumping around and making sounds and tries to dial her grandpa. But I mean, what the hell is that poor man even going to do? It's a 2-hour drive from where he is. He didn't pick up at first, so I finally managed to convince my best friend to just go inside and look around to see if someone's in the house. As I previously mentioned though, the place is really small, so we managed to search the whole place in like under a minute. And there was nobody in the house. There's also only one window in the house, which is in the bedroom, and it's high up, and it was closed. Her grandpa finally called back, and we told him what happened, and he said that we probably didn't lock the front door properly, but he didn't mention anything about the loud thump on the roof of the gazebo. To this day, I still have no clue what that was. We didn't sleep the whole night, and all the lights in the house were on because we didn't dare spend a second in the dark after what happened. Also, just to be clear, there are no mountain lions here, and there's maybe some wolves and foxes, but it's extremely rare. And I also have never seen either of them outside with my own 2 eyes, so it's very unlikely that it was them. As for tree branches, there wasn't anything on top of the roof, which is a straight horizontal roof. It's not that high too, so it can easily be checked, and no sound of anything hitting the ground afterwards, so that was weird. Also, it definitely wasn't snow because it was the beginning of September. A few people have said that it might be a person trying to scare us, and this is the thing that terrifies me the most, because around us are nothing but dark woods, and as I've mentioned previously, The place is really isolated. I would like a logical explanation for all of this, but the more I think about it and read, the more terrified I am. When I was a kid, my parents ended up fostering my cousins named J and R, aged 4 and 5, and at the time I believe I was about 10, and they shared a room with me. They brought about a couple of weird experiences. I had the top bunk and they shared the bottom bunk. They were used to getting up super early for their mum's doctor's appointment, so they would wake up around 6 a.m. and play on the bottom bunk. But they annoyed me to no end, so I would just pretend to sleep through it. Our closet door was about 2 feet from the foot of the bed, and one morning, it just cracked open all on its own. It must have squeaked or something, because they stopped playing when it happened. After a few seconds, it shut again, then opened, then shut. It did that a few times rather slowly, and then it just slammed shut and there was pounding on the door from the inside. After about 5 seconds, it went all quiet again. I climbed down over the side of the bed to avoid going close to the closet, and ushered the girls out of the room, not really knowing what to do because everyone else was asleep and I knew my parents wouldn't believe me if I woke them up over this. Then Jay became upset because her toys were kept in the closet and she was worried about them. I tried to hold her back, but she ran in and threw the closet door open. There was nothing out of the ordinary, and all of our clothes were hanging up, the toy bins were closed, and nothing else. My mum to this day still doesn't believe me. Jay always seemed to be the one the weird stuff surrounded, but they're in another state with their mum now and might be moving back soon, and I really want to see if they remember anything. This story takes place over a number of years. In late January this year is when the event actually occurred, but let me start from where this began. Maybe about 2 years ago, I just randomly started getting dreams about a dude in a straitjacket running into my basement room and screaming at me. This dream would occur once every few months and made me really unnerved, as you can probably imagine. I have a pet dog, and one night both him and I heard thumping coming from the stairs and close to my room. My dog started growling and eventually started to bark, but there was nothing there. A few more months pass and I have the dreams more often, and eventually it happens. It was a late Sunday afternoon in January of this year. I was playing Bulletstorm on the PS4 in my basement while my dog is sleeping with me, when out of nowhere I hear the footsteps again in rapid succession down my stairs. My dad was home at the time, so I called out to him, but the steps continued, right into my room, and then into my left ear I hear this huge scream. My dog immediately freaked out and ran upstairs, and I asked my dad if he had heard the noise, but he said no. I really don't know what's going on in this house, but it's pretty freaky, so any suggestions are very much appreciated. When I was in middle school, there was this one stairwell A, in the 6th grade hallway that was usually pretty empty. I would only see a few kids take that way up, and our school had 4 stairwells, 2 in the 6th grade hallway and the other 2 in the 7th and the 8th grade hallway. Even when class got out, though, it seemed everyone would just avoid stairwell A. I've only taken it 3 times while I was at that school, and as soon as you opened the big double doors, there was this really large vent that always had dust caked all over its large grate. I figured that the janitors just never paid it any mind. Strangely enough, though, stairwell A was pretty much clean unlike the rest. The other stairwells were always littered with food, wrappers, and gum, and you name it. The vent was big enough to crawl into, so students crawled into it from time to time into the crawl space. There was a rumor going around too that a young boy ran into some bullies on the last day of school sometime in the 70s. Apparently, they took him and forced him into the crawl space and locked him in there and just left him there crying for someone to help. All the teachers had left and there were no cameras, so allegedly he died and rotted there, potentially becoming rat food. Obviously, I didn't believe any of that, but I did always get an eerie cold feeling when I took that stairwell, even before I heard that rumor. Now, the last time I took stairwell A was when I was making my way to my 3rd period English class. I was on the first set of the stairs, almost to the middle of the stairwell, before you would take a turn to the next set of stairs. I dropped one of my pens that was tucked into one of my binder pockets. I bent down to pick it up. Mind you, I was completely alone. And then suddenly I heard one super loud shake like a metal grate was being tried violently or something. It came from the direction of the crawl space, and I jumped so hard that I almost ran from it straight away. But instead, I looked at the crawl space quickly to see if someone was playing a joke on me, but when I did, nobody was there. I got onto the stairs, and once I got to the third step, the shaking happened again, but louder, and I thoroughly freaked the hell out at this point and ran up the stairs as fast as I could. I don't know what it was. I don't believe in the rumor, but I knew then why kids avoided this stairwell, and from then on, I did too. Once, I was walking home with a friend on one of the trails around our town. We were almost to the end of the trail, and I could see the road and the sidewalk ahead lit up by the streetlight. It was around 11 p.m. or so, and we were just chatting about some stupid things that had happened at school that Friday morning. I was looking ahead the whole time, and I saw movement straight ahead of us. I paused and stopped walking. I thought maybe it was a deer, but it seemed much larger. My friend looked at me estranged and asked what was wrong. I told her that I thought I saw something, and she told me to stop freaking her out, so we just kind of laughed it off and continued. About 10 seconds later, though, we were almost to the sidewalk, and clear as day, out of the trees and the bushes, came this really, really tall dark silhouette of what looked like a man with deer antlers on his head. My eyes were watery, and I could feel the heat of my body spread in an instant. My adrenaline was pumping, and I just stood there and just kind of watched as it just silently glided across the trail into the patch of woods on the other side. I just remember saying, "What?" and looking at my friend. The figure had no legs. It was just a straight rectangular body and a head with what looked like antlers of some sort. My guess is that it was at least 8 feet tall from where we were. My friend just looked at me with the most disturbing look on her face. And at this point, we decided to ball up and just run for the sidewalk, and then straight home. When I was a child, I lived on Rhode Island in a small, predominantly Portuguese neighborhood where most every family knew the members of every other family. I would spend almost every day at my grandmother's house because my father worked 2 jobs and my mother was a nurse, so Grandma did most of the child raising for them. Now, the layout of the house is important here. She had a fairly large house, big front yard, and a long straight driveway running along the right side of the house with a small gate. From the side driveway, there were a few steps into a small, alcove with a door that I would use to get inside. The side door was my grandmother's preferred way that people come in and out of her house, because she was super particular about caring for the garden out front. I used to play with RC cars in the driveway, or just run around and be a little idiot, as children tend to do, and one day a large brown van parked in front of the house while I was outside playing with my RC cars. Grandma was inside in the kitchen, which was situated at the back of the house facing the backyard, so she didn't really know what was happening. I remember a lot of details about this van too. It was huge, it looked like a van you'd see in a 70s movie or something, but the paint was all chipped. It didn't look good at all, it was rusty and beat up. It was filled to the brim with stuff. It had a lot in it too, and I distinctly remember a blonde-haired, pink-faced doll that was so clustered in with other junk that it was pressed right against the glass of the van. There were other plush toys too, but that doll stuck out to me because I had a morbid fear of dolls at the time. My grandmother had porcelain dolls, and my dad had taken to scaring the crap out of me with child's play, so dolls equaled bad at the time. And that probably saved my life, to be honest. There was a man in the front, and I couldn't see his details very well. The car turned off, and he just sat there, staring at me. He motioned for me to come to him, and I approached the van, but as soon as I caught sight of that doll, I just booked it inside, and I left my toys out there and ran into the kitchen screaming and crying. I almost knocked over everything she was cooking, in fact, and I was just completely hysterical. All I can remember screaming is, "A man is out there, a man is out there," over and over again. She picked me up and went outside, and when we were there, the van was gone. There was no evidence of anything. My toys were untouched, and she picked them up for me and just kept me inside all day and said that I wasn't allowed to go outside. I don't think she ever did tell my mum, though, because up until I left home for college, I refused to go outside alone, and my mum always thought that it was weird that I didn't. Now, I'm not the one to really share their paranormal experiences with others super often, but sometimes there's just a point where it becomes too much to not say anything. I'm no stranger to the paranormal, and I'm a believer in it, but these recent experiences make me feel uneasy just thinking of them, let alone experiencing them. I try to stay upbeat and be the funny guy in most circles, but I feel as if this needs to get out there. So, just some quick backstory before I begin. My girlfriend got kicked out of her house and my parents took her in with us. I'm 19 and she's 18. My dad has also been quitting smoking and has more or less replaced it with drinking, causing a lot more fights between my parents than usual. My girlfriend and I both believe the negative energy is probably the main reason that these things have come to our house. So, it started a few weeks ago. My girlfriend and I were just relaxing in our room when suddenly she asks, "Do you feel that?" I, of course, was confused as to what she meant, and she quickly alluded to the entity in the hallway. I know my girlfriend, and she can be spooked easily, but it's never without justification. As soon as she said something, I just got this weird feeling in my lower back, telling me that something was very wrong. I don't know why, but that's just the area that I feel a lot of pressure on whenever there's something around me. She realized that I could feel it too, and she turned to me and said, "It's so dark." She then proceeded to tell me about how when she took a shower earlier that day, the towel was thrown off the bar that she kept it on and into the shower with her. After that, we went out to the kitchen to make some food where the conversation about what happened continued. She told me that she didn't want to sound crazy to me because she was scared of chasing me off with how weird it was, but she claimed that she could feel the presence of different things. She also then proceeded to exclaim that there were 6 different things at our house and all of them were dark. We quickly realized that we were out of pasta, what we were craving that night. So we went to get some at the grocery store and we both got this really uneasy feeling that something was in our back seat. I could easily brush it off as me or her being paranoid, but we both felt it, and we both felt it follow us into the store as well. And as we were driving home, I looked in the rearview mirror, and I swear to you that something was there. It was a dark shadow, and it kind of just stared at me, I think. I turned around and said, "What's that?" And so did my girlfriend when I said that, and when we looked, there was nothing there. As we were getting close to my house, though, something began to shake the back of my chair. We both immediately jumped out of the car and ran to the front door of the house, and when we got inside, we were both just freaking. We sat up that night talking, and we didn't get much sleep. And to be honest, I really don't know what to do now. I woke up to something last night. It sounded like my front door had been slammed shut. Initially, I thought it was a dream, as I'm a very vivid dreamer, but I'm certain that this was not the case. I don't remember what I was dreaming of, but when the door slammed shut, I was hurled into reality. Immediately, I scanned the room, trying to determine if this was in fact reality or just another weird dream. But then I saw my cat frozen in fear. His hair stood up like I had never seen before. His muscles flexed his deep claws into my thigh, and his back arched in a primal defense. And this terrified me. I knew that if he was truly scared, that I had a real reason to be as well, because I've always been told that animals can sense danger long before humans can. Finally, I examined the door, and I noticed that it swayed slowly, like it was breathing almost, like someone was standing on the other side trying to determine if I was still asleep. And then I could just barely see the silhouette of a man through the light of the cracked bedroom door. I held my breath as the door continued to breathe. I could literally hear my heart pumping its blood through my arteries, telling me to run, but I just refused to move, frozen now. I was completely paralyzed in fear, and I laid naked for many minutes watching the door, anticipating someone would burst through it. It felt like an eternity, but in this moment, my auditory senses were amplified. It was like my body just knew that this was a life or death situation, and it was scraping every last effort to increase my odds of survival. After the initial silence, I began to hear creaks outside my door, like someone was trying hard to move through my living room without awakening me. At this point, I knew I had no gun and no roommate in the house. I considered yelling in an attempt to frighten them away, but I was terrified that someone might respond. I legitimately thought that this was the moment where I would kill or be killed. I don't know how much longer I laid in bed, but eventually I mustered up the courage to check out every room in the house. I wielded the only defense that I had, which was my roommate's hot pink taser, and I checked every corner and closet, but I found no one. I still don't know what happened that night, but I'm certain my body was kicked into an evolutionary state because I and my cat truly believe that someone was inside my house. I grew up in a small California desert tourist town called Joshua Tree. It was home of the Joshua Tree National Park. Those of us who are older called it the Monument, as it was that before National Parkdom. I was in my early 20s at the time of this, which was approximately 14 years ago, I'd say, and was the only one with a car and a license. Growing up in a small desert town leaves you with limited options for fun, and we would make use of the park often. Occasionally, maybe once a week or so, a group of us would pile into the station wagon with beer, smokes, and a mixtape and drive through the park late at night. It was an empty road, really dark and quiet, other than the loud group of guys in the red Mercury driving fast from one entrance to another. But hours go by each time as we drove the long desolate road and stopped at various rocks we liked to climb. And for the life of me, I still can't understand just how desolate it was, how alone, and there were no other cars, no lights, except the occasional roadwork sign when warranted. And hell is exactly what we thought it was at the time. So this trip started out like pretty much every other, except maybe more of us than usual, I suppose. But we were crammed in that car, windows down, as I chain smoked and drove a good 20 miles per hour over the speed limit, gravel splitting up as we had a good time, and shortly into the trip I saw a light, a blue light. It was possibly miles and miles ahead, I'm really not too sure, but I guess that's the thing about the dark, right? Light is free to just kind of shine for miles. I remember saying to my friend something about having to slow down at some point ahead. Must be some road construction left by itself up ahead. I assumed that it had to be a sign. I mean, the light hadn't moved. We continued for a few miles to one of our favourite stops and got out, though. We climbed for a while, maybe 45 minutes or so, drank a little and joked, the norm, and then we piled back in and continued. Now, let me be clear that this light never moved, and we had already been out for an hour in our adventure. And I began to question, too, why the sign would have a blue light of all things. As we approached the light, I started to slow, and slowed more and more as we approached the source. And it wasn't a sign, and it wasn't a car, it wasn't a UFO, because standing on the side of the road, facing towards us, unmoving for over an hour at this point, was a man, a pale white man with a white beard, dirty old miner clothing with an old mining helmet, and even a pickaxe. His light was giving off an unnatural blue light, his face was blank, but he just kind of stared at us, directly at all of us. We sped up at this point as we drove by faster, his head turning to keep pace with us as we left. His light visible, unmoving once again, and facing us the entire trip out. I remember looking at the car clock shortly after passing him. It was damn near exactly 1 a.m. when we passed him, and we never saw a car or, hell, even a horse, either way as well, for this old sickly pale miner to get into the park, nor any reason for him to even be there. Worst of all, though, we estimated that this miner had to have been standing there, facing us for at least an hour and a half, never moving. I mean, not once did that light flicker as if he looked down for a moment or anything. He didn't even turn his head. He just stood there staring down at a road at a car full of dumbasses. We never did see him again, nor did we ever get an explanation as to why he was there or who he was. However, a couple of years ago I decided to check to see if anyone else experienced the same thing. And I found one other story of a couple that saw him near where we did, standing there, just staring late at night. I must admit that as a man now, I wish I would have stopped. Even if we would have experienced the most horrifying thing ever, I do wish we would have stopped, because I honestly believe that there was a ghost of an old dead miner out in that park, and I would know for sure today. So, I just want to communicate with others about this and hear your thoughts as well, because I have to admit that I'm a bit shaken up. I'm looking after my friend's 3 little girls tonight while she works on an overnight shift. Technically, it was last night, as it's now 2:30 in the morning. Also, it's officially my 28th birthday, and it's one for the books, let me tell you. So the girls are ages 5, 6, and 8, and my friend has a very long history of paranormal activity that started when she was a kid, and now her children are starting to have some experiences, and they're honestly just scared half to death. The 5-year-old was going on about her imaginary friend, Summer, tonight, who she's been talking about since she was 2. She says that Summer isn't really imaginary, she's real, she's just not alive. She describes her the exact same way every single time as well, and says that she likes wood. I have no idea why. My friend's daughter doesn't have an explanation for the wood thing either, which is weird. Anyway, she was talking to me about it tonight and said that she hasn't seen Summer in a long time and she's missing her and blah blah blah. Her older sister, 8, doesn't like to hear it because it freaks her out. I got them off the subject and played guitar for them, and all was well for a few hours. Then the 5-year-old looks out the window leading to the balcony and says that she sees a ghost. I, of course, just shrug it off, thinking it's just in her mind. The 6-year-old walks up to the window, turns around and looks me dead in the eyes with a look of horror that I've never seen on such a young child. The 8-year-old looks out the window and totally freezes. And so, I'm over here like, guys, you're getting yourselves worked up. And then I look out the window, and the expression, you look like you've seen a ghost, is exactly what I think my face looked like, because I was frozen. It was standing on the balcony across from us, and it was massive, like a giant almost. If that was just a person, they are the largest person on the planet, that's for sure. They were that big. I told the girls to back away quickly, and I went outside, and I couldn't really see much of the face, just the figure, and you could tell, though, that it was staring at us. 8-year-old comes back over, and I make up some story about shadows and stuff, and she's like, no, it's moving. And it was. It moved its arm and head in the most unnatural way that I've ever seen. Everything was just so wrong about it. My stomach was in knots, and I got the girls to go into the living room and went into mum mode, as they are my priority and I didn't have a second to worry about anything else. After they chilled, I kept going back to the window, and there it was, staring and moving its limbs just a little bit. Eventually, after quite some time, they fell asleep on the couch while watching a movie, and I snuck back out to check on things, and it's gone. It was just gone. I have no other way to say it. I must admit that sharing this with you guys just makes me feel so crazy, and I wish I had another adult with me to confirm what I saw, but I know what I saw, and it was there. There's no way it could have just been a neighbor or something. No way. It was way too big to be human, and it moved in a way that I've never seen a human move. It honestly sent just chills down my spine and really creeped me out. The 6-year-old woke up scared and is in the master bedroom sleeping now, and I'm sitting on this balcony staring at the balcony across from me, just waiting for this thing to reappear, and so far there's nothing. Nothing else happened, and nothing else needed to happen. I know what I saw, and it was like nothing that I've ever seen in my life. At this point, I know I'm going to be up all night. It made me so uncomfortable, and more importantly, I want to be aware of everything so I can protect the kids. I don't know, I feel just kind of crazy right now. If anyone can shed some light or just relate, that would be really good. Better yet, if you've seen a giant ghost, I'd sure love to know that I'm not alone. Also, my friend came home early from work, and I haven't slept a wink. She's very, very scared, and I left out many details in my state of panic, but this one in particular is probably important. So, the 8-year-old, before we saw the figure, actually heard her mum's voice, who was at work at the time, coming from her sister's room. I thought that I heard it too, but I didn't want to freak her out, and so we let it go. And so I said ghost, but after I told my friend what we had seen, she immediately said it sounds like we could be dealing with a demon. What are your thoughts? So long story short, for those of you who don't know, I used to work night shifts as a security guard at the local port, and it was haunted. Every night we had to go and do our patrol rounds around the whole perimeter and check every single office. The rounds usually lasted about an hour to an hour and 30 minutes, and the place was huge, 2-mile radius, and even with 2 of us on the rounds, it would still take us a while. So my co-worker Mike, the guy that was with me on my other experiences, had called in sick that night, so I went on my patrol rounds alone. As for the lieutenant, he stayed at the front gate post watching his anime and cameras or whatever. And around 2 a.m. I had finished the outdoor round in the truck. Sometimes we also used a 4-wheeler or a bike even. So after finishing the outside round, I would have to go inside of every single building and check the offices to make sure no office employee stayed overnight and, in case there's an intruder or trespasser on the property. The buildings were really dark inside as well. The maintenance man would always shut off the breakers in the box right before he'd leave. Unfortunately, security did not have access to those keys. Therefore, I had to use my flashlights to light up the hallways in the offices. The offices alone were pretty creepy, and I would say haunted because of their old age. And the fact that I had to walk around those buildings alone in the dark really creeped me out. It's honestly so dead quiet in there that you could hear my steel-toe boots echoing through the hallways. Now, the next part is a blur because I began to get chills and hyperventilate. Because as I'm walking through the dark office hallways, I began to hear a scratching-like sound on the walls right next to me. I stopped to listen, but the nail stopped as well. I thought it was probably just me, so I continued walking, and I stopped dead ahead in my tracks because the scratching sounds began to get louder this time. I knew right away that this was not normal because things like this have happened before in these places, and it's always really freaky. And I just came out of those offices too, so I could confirm that there was no one in there. I'm right in the middle of the building, with the nearest exit being quite a distance away on the other side of the building. But then, I hear pounding on the wall, and upon hearing this, I just begin to sprint out of the place with my adrenaline pumping. But the pounding followed me all the way to the end of the hallway, and once I got past it, it just stopped. I ran out of the building, and this put me on edge for the rest of the night. Like I said, when I entered another hallway, it stopped. But it sounded huge, and I tried calling it in to report it, but the phone signal in the offices was just complete trash. I actually didn't even bother to finish the round too, because I was going to pass out from anxiety, I think. So I went back to the front gate and I wrote a report on it. I had never written a report on my other experiences, but I was getting fed up with it now, so for the first time in my life, I actually wrote a report on the paranormal. No, I don't believe it was something logical because those punches were just unbelievably loud, and I know for a fact that there was nobody there. Plus, they were so loud that whatever was banging on the wall was definitely not human. I mean, I couldn't even stomp that loud if I tried, and I'm a pretty big dude. I weigh 227 pounds and I train in powerlifting, and there is just no way that that came from something human. When I was a child, I had an interesting life. I don't know if it's because I only remember it, but the paranormal side of things seems to be the most constant and prevalent thing out of my childhood. I hypothesize it's due to the depressing and hostile household that I grew up in. Everyone was dying or struggling, and fighting becoming a perfect blend for the paranormal to hit us, I suppose. But even with that, our family felt prone to the experience of these things. Something that I learned after my experiences, though, is that rumours within the family speculate it's something my grandpa's father brought about with him after the war, as he used to speak to himself and go down to the basement and fight with something, only to return with scratches down his back. But I can't exactly prove if this is true or not, so take that with a grain of salt. I believe that it has something to do with our Trinadian ancestry. Not that I know much about it, but I do know that Obeah was practiced amongst the slaves. But I'm getting off topic. I figured I'd provide backstory to my family, though. From my dad experiencing demons to my grandpa experiencing hellhounds and more, the only thing we all have in common is the hostile environments in which we brood these vile things. Anyway, my experiences started sometime when I was around 6, I'd say, when my father first moved in with my new stepmom. I remember her security alarm randomly going off or doors and such swinging open. I never saw a figure or thing within the house, but others apparently did. My father claimed he laid with who he thought was my stepmom, only to be something else. These events then picked up when we moved to another house. Very bad things happened to me there. It all started with me falling out of my bed in my sleep. This, of course, is what my parents told me, when in reality I was being pulled out of my bed with marks on my ankles. But writing this honestly gives me some major goosebumps. But then I started sleepwalking too, speaking in my sleep, etc. This all continued, and then I began seeing things, eyes peering around the corner, simple things like that at first. Just to make matters worse though, the attic was actually in my room. Smack dab in the middle was the decrepit entrance, and my parents told stories of this which they didn't inform me about till many years later. One story of which was dreaming about being locked in there with something, only for it to come into fruition the next day. She climbed up and she got locked in somehow and the light turned off. Really spooky stuff, and I understand why they didn't tell me it. The same stuff kept happening even when I went into my mother's house. I'd walk in my sleep and have horrible dreams which would make me have almost seizure-like effects as I dreamt and woke up. I remember one dream where I had a mist go around me and tongues were being spoken as I shaked in real life, even after I woke up. I admit that the dreams may be unrelated, but my gut tells me otherwise. Though some things happened, like doors opening and such, and it was mild compared to the other house, that's for sure. I remember one event, though, where I woke up screaming bloody murder, and I got out of bed and walked and felt like I was floating. As I walked out of my room, I had my first head-on encounter with this thing, this horrid creature. It kind of looked like a woman, I would say, stringy hair and missing her bottom jaw with guts hanging out where the lower half should be, and she let out the most horrific scream, and I just fainted. My parents allegedly ran out and grabbed me, claiming that I just stopped breathing and I was violently shaking. Then I remember waking up again, and then they told me to get to the couch and try and sleep. But obviously, there was no way that I was going to sleep that night. So I ended up just laying on my stomach and cried for a good hour, petrified of what I saw. After that, I did have some other minor experiences, but nothing really to write home about. But when we moved, it continued. It seemed like everywhere we moved, we brought this thing out of the woodwork and with us. When we first moved in and we were watching a movie in the basement, which was a dingy but not that creepy place, we were sitting in an attached room which we made into a man cave. We heard voices and footsteps, loud ones too, but clear as day, like someone broke in. So my father actually pulled out his pistol, so did my stepmom, and they checked the house, but there was nothing. No signs of entry and nobody there. Out of sheer panic, though, I grabbed my machete just in case, and they checked the property, looking back in the woods and everything, but there was nothing. We went back to sit down and continued watching the movie, The Lincoln Lawyer. I don't know, felt like I should add that. The one with Matthew McConaughey. And 10 or so minutes later, we heard it again, though much more faint this time. It was at that moment, too, that my father told me that we'd all be sleeping in the same room, and of course I happily obliged, not wanting to go back upstairs. A few months later, I was laying in my bed, and my parents never let me shut the door either, so in front of me was a long hallway, 2 door frames and a staircase to their room. And as I dozed off, I shot up with a gut-wrenching feeling just engulfing my entire body as a figure with glowing eyes and a slim body stared at me from the furthest doorframe. I, of course, absolutely peaked and tried to go back to the bed thinking it was a nightmare. But I woke up again, and I'm not sure what time it was, but it was standing and staring at me from the halfway point now. I, of course, unable to do anything, just went back to bed and grasped the blankets over my head, scared. The next time, though, I woke up and looked at my clock first for some odd reason, and I guess hoping it was almost time for me to get up, almost as if some artificial number would stop this thing, but the time was 3:30, which I later learned was the halfway point of the bewitching hour. And that thing was standing there in my doorframe. As I panicked and screamed, it let out what I think was a smile as I hurriedly covered my face in fear. I was about to die, I thought, gripping the blanket with all my might, hoping maybe it would just go away, and before I knew it, I saw a light gleaming through the holes of the blanket. Daytime had finally arrived, though the feeling of dread stuck with me for the rest of the day. That house, for a lack of a better term, was just really messed up. However, that's not the only memories that I have of there, because as I got older, I realized that I must have suppressed things which only came out as I got older. I remember that memory only emerged as I was watching The Conjuring, which almost sent me into a full-blown panic attack. And if anything else happened, I don't really know, and my parents kept most of that stuff hidden from me. Though as time goes by, I think I'm starting to gain more memories. As time went on, though, this stuff just went away with a mix of things like moving to a happier place and becoming a happier and less toxic household to me getting older, I guess. However, a few basic incidences happen, like feeling the energy of certain areas and seeing some basic stuff like a face and such, but nothing too bad though. Only a year ago, I was at my aunt's house, which has been home to many strange things, when the door slammed violently, shooting me up as pictures fell off the wall in the middle of the night, ironically at 3 a.m. I also had another experience where I was laying in bed when I felt like something sat on my bed violently, shooting me awake and watching my bathroom door slam open. As I went to walk out of my room, lightning actually struck. It might be unrelated, I don't know, but scared the crap out of me. Also, another time was when I lived in a little corner of the house and I woke up at night, 3 a.m. again, to have my curtains broken on top of me and this tall figure standing and just staring at me outside. Just stood there, and I did what I always do and tried to fall back to sleep. What's interesting about this tall and lean figure, though, is that it always seems to follow me, but only appear when I have really good days. Like, it doesn't want me to enjoy my life or something, but I'm not entirely sure. All in all, though, all of this stuff is just completely perplexing to me. A part of the reason why I'm sharing this is maybe to try and get some answers or theories or even other people's experiences. I'm also sharing this to maybe help someone feel not so alone as they go through some of the similar experiences I did. Anyways, please feel free to ask any questions below and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks for listening. I begrudgingly earn a living repossessing bank collateral in the form of motor vehicles. As you can probably imagine, most people I deal with are not happy to see me. For some background, I'm not your typical repo man by looking at me. Most guys that I work with are over 6'3", 200 to 300 pounds, bald with a beard. I know that sounds specific, but it really does hold true in my experience. I, on the other hand, am 5'11", 150 pounds, but I do have a beard. So, I was working out during the day and checking a retail location for a vehicle that I'd been searching for. The address that I was checking was located in a large mall area. I glanced in my rearview mirror to see a red Ford Focus behind me. He made a few of the same turns I did, but I didn't think twice about it. After the 7th or 8th turn that he mimicked, though, I decided to pull into a parking lot. I figured that he would either move on or come and talk to me, if that was his goal. I noticed that he was on the phone in my rear view. I parked the truck and watched the car as it parked about 50 feet from me. I noticed the man driving the Focus was staring and pointing at me, though, as he spoke on the phone, so I decided to ask what his deal was. When I approached, he got out of his vehicle, which was alarming, so I backed off and didn't get closer. I leaned my head out of my open window and I said, "Hey sir, is there a reason you're following me?" He moves his phone from his ear, covering the microphone, and yells, "Yeah, you're harassing people on private property. The cops are on their way." I told him that that was fine and I would wait around to speak to the police. He yelled some more unintelligible nonsense as I put my window up and sat pretty waiting for the police. A few minutes later, a cruiser shows up behind me. The officer approached my window and we spoke about the situation. I told him that I'm permitted on private property unless I'm explicitly asked to leave by someone who owns the property or works security, which he agreed with. Long story short, the police told me that I was good to go and asked that I not engage with this man as I left. I complied and planned to move on with my day. About 20 minutes after all of this, I glanced in my rearview to see the same Focus driving a couple of cars behind me. So, I parked again, out of frustration now. I immediately exited my truck and lit a cigarette. The man driving his car screeched up beside me and exited his car without putting it in park, rather just putting it in neutral. As his car begins to roll away, he is turned away from it, screaming at me about violating his right to privacy and harassing the public at this mall. I calmly told him that I was already cleared by the PD and that I was losing patience. I told him that he needed to leave right then before I called the police. And it was at this point that his vehicle struck the concrete base of a light pole and stopped. He started screaming and saying that I crashed his car. I told him that I had dashcam footage that would negate that claim, and that's when he charged me. Now remember, I'm not a big guy, but I've dealt with plenty of confrontation at this job, and this guy did not appear coordinated at all. I stepped out of his path and guided him to the ground, telling him to stay down while I leave and to leave me alone. I got in my truck and I left. Looking back, I absolutely should have called the police again, as I've gotten the officer's cell phone number and badge number and everything. But this story all comes to a head 2 nights later in a bizarre turn of events that genuinely scared me. At this point, I had just gotten married to my lovely wife, and we were living in our little one-bedroom in our hip little suburb of a major Midwest city. It was a Friday night, and I decided I would go and grab some beers for the wife and I to enjoy after a long week. As I was leaving the store with our booze, I saw a maroon Ford Focus in the parking lot, seemingly unoccupied. I made a mental note of the coincidence, given the bizarre ordeal that I had a couple of days prior, but didn't think too much more of it. As I pulled into my apartment's parking lot, the Focus pulled in behind me. I hadn't noticed it followed me until this point, and I lived on the 3rd floor, so I decided I was going to hustle up the steps, just in case this was the same guy and he'd stalked me or something in order to extract his revenge for whatever perceived transgression that I'd bothered him with. But my plan didn't work. He followed me to my patio where my wife was waiting, again, unbeknownst to me. I was apparently not feeling very observant that night. And that was when this guy snuck up, crouching behind our small fence. Neither of us knew that he was there until he said, still hidden from view, "Pretty girl." I snapped to my feet and began to look around when I spotted him. I knew instantly it was him too, and I immediately ordered my wife to go inside, lock the door and call the police. When I approached him, he drew a small switchblade and pointed it at my belly. I began to back up with my hands up, saying something along the lines of, "We don't have to do this. What do you want?" And he told me that he wanted me to call my wife back outside. But that was not going to happen. I'd rather be stabbed than expose her to this man, so I told him as much. He lunged at me with the knife, grazing and cutting my side as I attempted to grab and redirect his forearm. Then he went to the ground where he lost his knife. I got some knees to connect to his head, and when the police lights became visible, I heard shouting. Long story short, Buddy was arrested on sight, and I provided the badge number and the PD of the officer from work a couple of days prior in order to corroborate my claims. I decided to press charges, and as far as I know, he's awaiting a court date. I'm sure that I'll have to be involved in it, which I'm not looking forward to. So I'm female, 23 now, and in this story I was 21 with a 4-month-old baby. He's mine and he's 2 now. I'm about 5'9", a bit overweight, and I have social anxiety around new people. So I went with my sister, 26 and 5 feet tall, to her work as she worked at a very nice restaurant in a shopping centre, and we went straight there for her 6 p.m. start after being in the city all day collecting money for a cat rescue. I'm just chilling out, eating good food and binging on Reddit when I decide I want to smoke. I know, bad habit. So I pack up the kidlet and let my sister know that I'm going out to the car park to have a smoke as she passes through the dining area. The car park was about 70 meters away, I think, from the restaurant, had good lighting, and because it was so late, I could hang around near the doors. And this is where it starts to get creepy. So the security guard was doing his rounds, about my height and Indian. I'm not trying to be racist here, and I know that this is just anecdotal, but most of my experiences with Indians, personally, have not been all that good. But anyway, he decides to check on me, and I was like, that's cool, man, I'm just having a smoke. And the conversation went something like this. Hey, how you doing? You okay? Hi, yeah, I'm pretty good, just waiting for my sister to get off work. Ah, good. Your baby? A very cute baby. I have 4 at home. You got a husband? Yeah, he's my baby. That's good. I have a fiancé. Complete lie, mind you. I was 100% single, but he was already making me a little bit anxious. You know, I could be husband. I look after baby for you. I look after you. No thanks. I'm sure your wife wouldn't appreciate that anyway. No, wife love baby. Wife will love you. You can come home with me. I finished my smoke, and I'd been moving the pram further away from him every second. No thanks, I gotta go, okay? He then follows me inside. I go all around the mostly closed shopping centre, hoping to lose him in Coles. I lost him for about 5 seconds, but Coles had shut for the night. The only place left open was my sister's work, so I went back there, even though I didn't want him to know where I was. As I was about to walk into the restaurant, I saw him coming up the escalator, and he was still watching me. I take the last 2 steps towards the hostess, who happened to be the owner's daughter, and told her what was going on. At this point, the security guard is standing in front of the restaurant, still staring at me. The hostess takes me to a semi-secluded booth and goes to talk to her dad about the situation. As she's gone, the creepy security guard came into the dining area, searched for me, and then came and sat at my booth, way too close to me and my child. So, how old are you? I want to ravish you, pretty woman. You be my mother to my babies. We make cute babies. And at this point, it was very clear that I was very uncomfortable. He still made it worse, though. But don't worry, I security. I protect you and baby. He's searching across the table with one hand now. The other hand is reaching towards my pram. I'm frozen. I don't care about the hand near me. I'm watching the other one because nobody touches my baby. I'm about to snap, go full mama bear mode when the owner, 40s or 50s, 6 foot plus big wide build, at the restaurant, steps in asking if there's a problem. Hey, is there a problem here? No problem. Just talking to my lovely lady. This is a customer. Has she done something wrong? No, never. She's my lady. See? We're going to get married. He grins creepily. The silent warning to play along is etched into his face. No, I'm not. Please, just leave me alone. I just want to eat my dinner. Funny lady, right? See? We joke. I don't know you. Please, just leave me alone. She says she wants you to leave now, alright, bud? She's just messing. She loved me. I'll be waiting for you, pretty lady. He leaves at this point, and the other guy makes sure I'm okay and moves me to the employee break room and fills my sister in too. 2 hours later, and my sister has finished her shift, we packed up and we head to the car. And the guy appears out of nowhere. I think that he was actually waiting for me the entire time. I take pretty lady and baby home now, okay? Come on, pretty lady, we go home. And like an angel steps out from his car, the guy from the restaurant stands right behind this dude. Hey, bud, she's going home with her sister, all right? No, a pretty lady mine. She come home with me. Hey, lady, get in your car. I'll take care of this. So we get into the car and we go home. I found out the next day from my sister that her boss had physically restrained this guy because he went to grab my arm as I was getting into the car and then got him fired and permanently banned from that shopping centre. The whole situation was really messed up and, quite honestly, quite creepy. I was 15 years old, and back in those days, you'd usually catch my friends and I at the big AMC movie theatre. It's a huge theatre. It kind of reminds me of an airport almost, and it was a popular hangout for kids that age on weekends. I remember going to the movies one night with friends, and a group of guys approached us. We started chatting and flirting, I must admit, as you do at that age, and they said that they went to one of the local high schools. One of the guys that I was talking to eventually asked for my phone number, and I gave it to him. I was naive and thought that this was pretty harmless, and these were the days before cell phones were ubiquitous, so I gave him my home phone number. And to my surprise, he called me maybe a day or two after that, and we talked for a bit. We had a few more phone conversations here and there before he asked me on a date. As we made plans to meet, he told me that he needed to tell me something. He admitted that he wasn't actually 16, or whatever age he said he was, and he wasn't even in high school. He was 22, in fact. I fell silent, trying to think of my response, but there was more. Not only was he 22, but he had been in prison and was recently released. Why? For accessory to murder for being in the car when his friend shot someone while they were driving by. I still remember the feeling of just being frozen in fear, and I calmly said that I didn't want to talk to him anymore and to please never call me again, and I hung up. After I hung up, though, the phone immediately started ringing. I picked it up, but before I could even say hello, this man had called back and was already screaming at the top of his lungs into the phone. I can't remember exactly what he was saying, but it was along the lines of, "Don't you ever hang up on me again," calling me every name in the book. So what did I do? I hung up again, this time leaving the phone off of the receiver. I remember being so scared to tell my parents because I didn't want them to be disappointed in me. They were always so proud of me for making good decisions. It was my fault, after all, giving some guy I'd just met my phone number, so I didn't say anything at first. The calls kept coming, but to keep my parents in the dark, I usually made sure that I was the one answering the phone when it rang. And he told me that he had put my home phone number into a reverse phone directory and found my address. He would call and say things like, "I like your sister's new green car," to make sure I knew that he was watching the house. Around this time, I developed a fear of being home alone. I couldn't be alone even for a minute, so if my parents and sister were ever gone, I'd call a neighbour friend to spend time with me. One night, my parents were in bed, but my sister and I were up late watching TV, when we saw a car pull into our driveway and sit there with the lights on. I couldn't see who was in it, but I knew that it was him. And shortly after that, everything just stopped. I remember thinking how crazy it was that he had done all that and then just disappeared. A year, maybe 2 years later, I was sitting at home watching the finale of American Idol. It's funny the little random details you remember when something significant happens. And the phone rang. The caller ID said it was coming from a correctional facility. Confused, I answered it, and it was a collect call from, you can guess who. I honestly couldn't believe it, and I obviously didn't accept the call, and I just hung up. And I never heard from him again. I did eventually tell my parents about this years later, and they said, "No wonder you were so scared to be alone." I should have told them at the time, I know, because it could have escalated much further than what it did. This story actually mirrors a similar experience I had a year ago too, one that I've shared elsewhere. I really do wonder if there's something about me that attracts these types of people too after two occurrences like this. One lapse in judgment can lead to situations like these. Also, before I forget to mention this, one of his harassing phone calls was particularly creepy because he called me and he described how he saw a dog get hit by a car on the highway, and the whole time he was just kind of laughing to himself. Not in a way that was just intended to scare me, but he was laughing like he genuinely found it funny, which leads me to believe that this person was an absolute psychopath. So let's go all the way back to when a friend and I were around 14 years old. This was in the days before the mass adoption of the internet, and so a lot of time was just spent outdoors after school playing around with friends. Where I'm from, it would get fairly dark early in the winter, and the house I grew up in had a fairly large plot of land surrounding it, which is where this story takes place. So, a game that my friend and I really enjoyed around this time was to play hide and seek using a torch, a flashlight for US readers, to help find the person who was hiding. My parents had this fairly powerful one that we would sneak out of the house with and then use in the game. The person seeking would close their eyes and count to 50 or so, and the person hiding would run off into the night and try to get a spot where they wouldn't be easily found. The big rule of the game, though, was that the person seeking had to keep the torch on at all times, and the person hiding was discovered if illuminated by said torch. It made for a fun game of cat and mouse, and where you could know where your seeker was and use this to your advantage when repositioning. But of course, they could easily spin around quickly and cast a large circle of light over the trees or whatever and catch sight of your white shirt or sneakers. It kept us entertained anyway, and I guess my parents thought that it was nice that we were doing stuff outside, although it often ended up being fairly creepy and late. But this one time, it was my turn to be the person hiding, and I headed down to what I felt might be a good spot, way off towards the far boundary wall of the house. The property was encircled by land, but beyond the low stone wall surrounding it were other houses with their own bits of land. It was very dark away from any other house lights, and in this area there was an old abandoned hut that was falling apart, long grass, a few trees, and a large trench that was deep enough to stand in and disappear below ground level. But the obvious place to hide was either under or inside the hut. The door was locked, but it had no windows. Though, for whatever reason, I felt that this was too easy this time around, and I took the chance to get down into the grass just close enough to the ditch that I could slide into it if needed, but keep my head up to watch for the approach of the lamp. But nothing happened for a long time too, but I just had a feeling that someone was close by. I glanced off to the side and caught sight of my friend. Only he wasn't using the torch that sneak. He appeared to have his hand over the end of it so that the light wasn't coming out, or he had maybe turned it off or something and was keeping his hand near the button in order to snap it on again if he needed to. Clearly, though, he'd got annoyed that the light was giving him away and I was avoiding him when really he'd just been looking in the wrong place. The land available to us wasn't that vast, but basically, if you were smart, you could use the thread of the moving spot lamp to force the person to move and just listen out for the sounds of that, but gradually pinpointing where they must be. But no, my friend wasn't doing this. He was trying to do things the easy way and get one up on me and probably try to give me a jump to boot. And well, I wasn't going to let him do that. So I slid into the ditch. And now, I was going to be very hard to find without shining that light down into where I was, particularly with the hut acting as a great distraction. I decided not to even try to get away since I couldn't watch for the light to see which way he was looking, so I just stayed there very still. Annoyingly, despite my very clear hiding spot, my friend got closer and closer, and even closer to the trench, brushing through the grass in a very deliberate manner and seeming to have a good idea of where I was. I waited for the jig to be up, trying not to move. I still didn't see any flashlight, and then after what felt like forever, my friend walked right by and just kept going. I still didn't move because I really wanted him to never find me because he was cheating. And it was only when I saw the light way off back towards the house that I climbed out of the ditch and started to look back the other way. I eventually got caught, and in the debrief after the round, I told my friend just how close he had gotten to finding me in the ditch. And He looked slightly concerned. Dude, I didn't go up that way, he said. I laughed as I thought that he was messing with me. Yes, you did, I replied. You were covering the torch trying to catch me out. And I'll never forget his face as it lost some of its color. Dude, that wasn't me. I don't think we ever ran back inside of a house as fast as we did in that moment. I still have no idea who it was down that part of the property in the dark that night, or what they were holding in their hands, and why they seemed to be searching for someone, probably me, despite very much so not being invited to play our game. All I do know is that after this, we never really played hide and seek down there again. These events transpired between last September and December. In September, I moved into student halls, which is university accommodation, which is 8 people with a room each and shared living space and a kitchen. Everyone was great, and we had great freshers week, and we didn't even notice that we actually had a nightmare living amongst us. Adam. Adam was the oldest of our flat. He was 23, and we were all between the ages of 18 and 19. There were us 3 girls and 5 guys. Adam is a great-looking guy. He wore expensive, trendy designer clothes and was always very well-groomed, and he was the life and soul of our flat parties and was always the first one to the bar whenever we hit the clubs and stuff. So, 2 of our flats were very flirty with each other, Adam and one of my flatmates called Jennifer, and they always had this flirty banter and always chose each other whenever we played Truth or Dare or one of those types of student drinking games. They were obviously into each other, but Jennifer said one night that she got this weird vibe from Adam when he was drunk, which another one of my flatmates, Callan, also picked up on. In early October one night, we got together as we normally do on a Friday night to do a few drinking games and then hit the students' nightclub as most students do on a Friday. Adam does the normal thing and gets everyone their drinks, and then as the night goes on, a few of us notice that Adam is buying shots for just himself and Jennifer, which isn't normally what he does, but whatever, I guess. It gets to 2 a.m, and although we have all split up a couple of times, and we do when we go to smoke outside and stuff, we notice that Adam and Jennifer aren't anywhere to be found, and we can't get in touch with them. But another one of my flatmates tells me to chill, and they've probably just hit it off with each other because they've been flirty for a couple of weeks now. The next morning, I'm taking some laundry to the laundry room, and Jennifer comes out of Adam's room, looking like she has the worst hangover that I've ever seen. She claims that she remembers nothing of last night and is slightly concerned that she woke up in Adam's room. Jennifer has everything until she tries to get into her room and finds that she had actually lost her car key to her room. They search Adam's room high and low and can't find it anywhere, so we put it down to her losing it and she has to buy a replacement card. And this is where things get creepy. Now, there's a lot to this story, but I'll just include the major things for time's sake. So Jennifer has one hell of a busy schedule in university and is out mostly all week. And over the weeks, she finds that some of her items of her clothing are going missing, mainly underwear and gym clothing like sports bras and stuff. She's messy and her room is very much a tip, so she kind of puts it down to just being messy. Jen is also a heavy sleeper, but one night she does half wake up and notices that her door is slightly ajar, which is weird as it takes a keycard to get into someone's room, when the door is locked, that is. She does have sleep paralysis, so she kind of puts it down to night terrors or something, which she has occasionally. But there's this one night that she awakens to a figure at the end of her bed. But, like the other time, she puts this down to her sleep paralysis again and thinks nothing more of it at the time. Jennifer continues to get really strange vibes from Adam when we're drinking and making creepy passing comments about Jennifer's physical appearance. But Jennifer is creeped out when she reveals that she's going on a coffee date with a guy from her course. Adam doesn't say anything about this, but when she's on her date, Adam is coincidentally in the same coffee shop as her and her date. And she gets the feeling that he was watching her for the entire date, which made her really uncomfortable. But when Jennifer asked why Adam was in the coffee shop, He just replied with, "Because I felt like it." At the time, I didn't see why Jennifer saw this as such a big issue, but later on in the story, I see why she was so concerned by this. Jennifer's night terrors continued, but personal belongings were going missing now too, and one of these included a locket containing a picture of her and a deceased grandmother, which upset Jennifer quite a bit, and she was now very suspicious. So basically, she has suspicions that someone has access to her room, and she does suspect that it's someone in our flat. And yes, the only one that she actually suspects is Adam. Jennifer then tells me that she actually wants to put a camera in our hallway to see if anyone is accessing her room, especially at night, and comes up with a ridiculous but a pretty genius idea. But one of our flatmates is a cyclist, and he has one of those helmets with a GoPro on it. So one night, he leaves his bicycle and helmet in the long hallway of our flat with the GoPro facing down the hallway on record. Jennifer and Adam are in the opposite rooms at the far end of the hallway, so the GoPro is in great position at the end. For the first 2 nights of doing this, there's really nothing to report, because the battery just ran out. But on the 3rd night, her suspicions are confirmed. Adam actually has her keycard, which Hall's office told her got deactivated when she got a new one, but that clearly wasn't the case, as he'd been getting into her room and watching her while she slept. Again though, she's a very heavy sleeper, so she barely wakes up. We're now in December though, and getting close to Christmas break, and Jennifer makes a report about Adam, but Adam has very rarely been seen lately, and after about a week of security knocking on his door, they finally open up his room to find that it had been emptied, as if someone had left in a rush. But some of the things that were found are really disturbing. Jennifer's missing clothing items are found at the bottom of the empty wardrobe. Candid pictures of Jennifer are there, myself and the other girl in our flat, Rachel. Empty whiskey bottles are littered around the room, as well as small drug-like bags are found in his drawers, some still containing drugs as well. And a flash drive is also found. And we were never informed just what exactly was on it, but we were told that Adam would be getting kicked out for this, and the police were going to contact him. And since then, we have never seen Adam or ever heard what actually happened to him. But it certainly has been a harrowing experience for all of our flat. Mainly Jennifer, though, who is now very careful with who she trusts. We still don't know exactly who Adam was and what he was up to, but we have some pretty good theories. And I'm guessing that you probably get what they are. I worked as a cocktail waitress when I was 22. My shift was from 5 p.m. until 2 a.m. As a waitress, I'd become used to being harassed. Usually it wasn't anything too over the top or frightening. Most customers were just regulars who flirted kind of innocently anyway. Just good-natured banter, nothing threatening or in any way sinister. And up until this night, I'd never felt a sense of danger from any of the customers that I'd waited on. On this particular night, though, everything changed. I was being harassed by a creepy customer that I'd never seen before. He said such inappropriate things to me that it honestly crept me out. He was relentless, too, with his inappropriate remarks. And at one point, as I was serving him his drink, he reached out and put his hand on my ass. After this happened, I never went back to his table again. If he wanted another drink, then he'd have to go up to the bar and ask the bartender himself. I was through with waiting on this sinister creep. This happened back in 1978, so it was a time when I didn't have any recourse when things like this happened. The bartender only made customers leave when they were far too drunk to sit on a bar stool or at a table or booth. Otherwise, we were on our own to deal with creepy customers. At closing, though, he finally left, and even though he was gone, I still felt such a sense of just unease that I kinda just wanted to go home. I wasn't easily spooked, but this guy had really freaked me out. There was just something really off about him. It took me nearly an hour after closing to complete the work and the cleaning that I had to do to have the bar ready for the following day. So it was about 3 a.m. as I made my way through the dark parking lot to get to my car. It was such a deserted and isolated place at night. The parking lot had woods that surrounded it, and that in and of itself was pretty creepy. But as I was about halfway to my car, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. My heart began to pound as I realized that he had waited in the lot for me to come out. And I knew then that I had to get to the safety of my car, or this man was going to do God knows what to me. Luckily, I was young and fit, whereas this man was in his late 40s and very much overweight. My thoughts were quickly assessing my situation. I didn't want to be kidnapped and murdered. That was the scenario I envisioned if this man got to me before I could get to my car. I knew that I would have to make a run for it, so I just ran as fast as possible. I jumped inside the car and locked the door, and it wasn't one moment too soon because this man was now at my driver's side window demanding for me to roll it down. He kept yelling that he didn't want to hurt me, he only wanted to talk. He began to pound on the window as I fumbled with my keys to try and get the hell out of there. I began to fear that he'd actually shatter my window and get his hands on me. Finally, though, I got my car started, and as I put the car into reverse and backed out, he began to scream bloody murder. He was yelling for me to stop because I'd run over his foot. But my gut instinct told me that this man was faking the injury to get me out of my car, and I was not going to get out of that car for any reason. And I just drove home as fast as I could. Once home, I called the police, and they came to take my report and get my description of the guy. At this point, I wasn't certain about whether I had injured him or not. I explained all of this to the police officer, and the police sent another officer to the parking lot to see if he was still there and suffering from an injury, but he wasn't. Nobody called the police to report a hit and run either, and the police told me that I'd done the right thing by not falling for his ruse. I called my boss the following day and told him that I wouldn't be returning to work. I'd never been so frightened by anyone before. It was a night in which I truly feared for my life, and there was just no way that I could make myself return to that job. And that night still haunts my dreams. So my friend David has lived in this house for about 5 years now. My other friend, Brent, used to live there too with him with a few others. David lives in this house alone now, but we're all friends and visit a few times a week. And Brent used to tell me all the time about just how haunted the place was, but out of the 4 years I've known him, I've never really seen anything, so I just kind of wrote it all off. One night, about a year ago I'd say, Brent and I were house sitting for David while he was out of town, feeding the cats, watering the plants, and just hanging out because we had nothing better to really do anyway. I went downstairs to pee because Brent was in the bathroom upstairs, and as I walked back up, I felt something touch my shoulder and I fell down. It wasn't a grab, but it was kind of like a shove almost. I convinced Brent to go downstairs with me and see what the hell that was, or if it was just a coincidence. We left the lights off because I thought it'd be more fun and could potentially see something, and just kind of sat there in the dark on opposite ends of the room. The basement had no windows, and it was just one big open room with a bathroom and a single bedroom that went off of it. Brent sat by the staircase, and I sat all the way opposite. We hadn't sat there for more than 5 minutes, I'd say, in silence, when I saw an orange light manifest on my side of the room and fly just all the way into the bedroom and turn the corner. It was about 7 feet in the air, and I, obviously terrified, launched myself off the ground and on my hands and feet barreled toward Brent. I said, "Did you see that?" And all he said in an extremely calm voice was, "The orange light? Yeah." Upon seeing this, we made our own makeshift Ouija board and sat in that room. And in no time at all, we were getting responses. I've known Brent for 4 years, and it's easy to say that he's my best friend. He had no reason to mess with me and is extremely trustworthy. He's a ride-or-die kind of guy. But we got an alleged spirit coming through named Ham. We asked if they were initials and just got a no. But then the cat launched out of the room and I asked, "Can the cat see you?" and again got no. All of the responses were misspelled, but easy enough to figure out what they were supposed to be. And the following is what happened. So, I asked some questions, and they went like this. How many of you are there? We got the answer of 15. Do you know my name? And my name came through. Do you know my dog's name? And yes, my dog's name came through. Do you follow me home? And then it said no. And then I asked, Ham, what do you want from us? And it said, run, demon. And you bet that I flew out of that basement as fast as I possibly could. But one last spooky thing happened on the way out, though. I had my radio on as I was backing out of the driveway, and the signal cut out multiple times until I hit the street. Now, I know that that could have been a coincidence, but it has never happened in my car before. Also, I've never seen Brent that visibly shaken, especially from the house that he lived in for years, because he stayed at my house that night. On exactly May 26th of 2017, me and my brother Brandon and his friend Herbie went on a spur-of-the-moment camping trip. The spot that we had in mind was a place not far from where we lived, behind a church called Holt's Baptist Church. When I got off work, I met Brandon and Herbie at our grandparents' house to get our gear ready, and we made it a sort of bare-bones trip due to the short amount of time that we had to get everything ready. Of course, being the outdoors lover that she was, my dog Angel was going to tag along with us. If you haven't heard my other story, she's a Jack Russell Rat Terrier mix. So we loaded up our stuff and ourselves into my grandfather's little blue Ford Festiva, and we were off towards our spot. It's about a 10-minute drive from our grandparents' house, so in a short time we'd arrived there. The place where you park is beside the church, and it's gated off so that nobody can take their trucks or four-wheelers down the gravel road. So we unloaded the Festiva, climbed over the gate, and started making our way towards the campsite. About 100 feet into the gravel road, the lake had risen up into it, so we couldn't actually walk across and keep going. Instead, we found a small deer trail that led up the bank and around the water. There was a lower trail that ran parallel to the bank, and the higher trail went up a little higher. For whatever reason, we took the higher trail, and for a short while we snaked through the woods, and finally we reached the end of the deer trail. It abruptly ended at the side of the bank, and we had to slide down it about 10 feet, I'd say, to get back onto the gravel road. But once we were all back down, it was about a third of a mile back to where we would be setting up camp. It was hot that day, and there were ticks and mosquitoes just everywhere biting us constantly. But when we made it to camp, though, we sat our stuff down and started looking for ticks that might have hitched a ride onto our pant legs. Sure enough, we found a lot of ticks on us all. This irritated Brandon extremely, as he had found one in his hair. Herbie and I just laughed as we cursed and fumbled around trying to get the tick off of him. And shortly after that, we set up camp. It was a simple campsite, just nestled down in a small flat spot down near the lake. It's actually a really nice spot. I started setting up tent, and I sent the other two with the axe to look for some dry wood. I tied Angel to a small tree next to the tent, and as soon as I got it set up, she just kind of plopped down in front of it as if she had put it up or something. About that time, the boys had dragged back some sticks and things like that back to the site. Some of them were dry, but most of them were a little damp. I'm pretty good at making fires, so with a little persuasion, the fire finally got started around dusk or so. My brother jokingly yelled out, "When are you going to cook some food, honey? I'm starving." I agreed and went back to my backpack to get out the cast iron skillet, only to realize that I had left the stupid thing sitting at the house instead of putting it in my bag. Slightly irritated, I went to go get the hot dogs out of the cooler. "I guess we'll be cooking our wieners on a stick tonight, boys," I said as I turned around holding the pack of hot dogs. Then I noticed Brandon's peace tea can laying on the ground in front of him. I asked him to hand me the can, and I promptly cut off the top of it, washed it out, filled it halfway with some of our drinking water, put some hot dogs in it, and sat it down in the coals of the fire. Turns out, we didn't even need the stupid cast iron skillet. In about 10 minutes, the dogs were all cooked, and we were ready to eat. I handed them out, and we all chowed down on them, and of course I couldn't leave Angel out, so I ripped one of the hot dogs up and I gave it to her. We all finished and put the food stuff away, and I grabbed a Red Bull out of the cooler, cracked it open, and asked Herbie if he had ever seen a ghost before. "Well, I can't see what doesn't exist," he said, laughing back. "You don't believe in ghosts?" I asked. "Nah, man, that shit ain't real. It's just for movies." Brandon and I had shared some of our stories with Herbie before, but he didn't believe us. "Y'all were just on shrooms or something when we saw that shit. There's no way that it was actually real," he said, laughing again. I said, "One day something's gonna happen to you, man, that scares you shitless, and you're gonna have no explanation for it. And when it does, you'll believe me then." He just shrugged it off, and we continued talking about all different things for a few more hours. We were all tired after talking and shooting the breeze, so we all agreed that it was time to hit the sheets. We all climbed into the tent and started getting settled in. From left to right, it was me, and Angel, Brandon, and then Herbie. I think Herbie and I fell asleep before Brandon. I'm not sure how long I was asleep too before Brandon woke me up, saying, "Man, there's ticks just all over this tent, and they're getting on me." In my halfway asleepness, I just told him to shut up and go back to sleep. He said that he hadn't been to bed yet because of the ticks, and he said that he was hearing things outside of the tent, something splashing around in the water. I told him that it was probably just a fish and not to worry about it. I fell asleep again, and about an hour later was woken up once more, but this time I was hearing things outside the tent too. Brandon had fell asleep, and behind our tent I could hear what sounded like somebody getting out of the lake and taking steps through the woods. It sounded like when you get out of a pool and all of the water kind of splatters and drips underneath you. This obviously kind of freaked me out a bit, but I was so sleepy that I just fell back asleep right after that. I was woken up again, and this time it was Brandon smacking me to get up. I raised up and asked what was wrong with him. "Dude, I found a tick in my ear. I'm tired of this campsite, man. Let's just get out of here." I looked at my phone, and it was about 4 a.m. at this point. I sighed and agreed to leave just so that he would shut up about it. We shook Herbie awake and got out of the tent, and it was pitch black out, so I tried to start the fire back up, but all the wood was too damp and it just wouldn't catch. With no light, I went searching for my flashlights that I'd brought with us. I turned it on and nothing. It was completely dead. Great, I thought. I got my iPhone and turned the flashlight on, and the warning popped up saying that I only had 20% battery left. Slightly pissed at this point, I told them to help me get all the stuff together so that we can leave before the phone dies and we don't have any light. Like every camping trip ever, the gear you bring is never packed up well when you go to leave as well. Our sleeping bags sloppily rolled up, the tent bag was stuffed full in a really awkward way, which made it hard to carry properly. Our chairs kept coming undone and getting caught on everything, and it wasn't a very fun walk back. I was walking Angel on a leash with my other hands full of gear. The boys both had their hands full too. Brandon was carrying the axe in a very haphazardous way, which it kind of made me a bit nervous. But my hands were just so awkwardly packed that I had to sit it all down and just kind of readjust it all. But once I sat down, I looked down at Angel, and she was dead fixed on something in front of us in the darkness, her hair standing up on her back, and she was growling now. I assumed that it was a raccoon or a possum and just motioned her to look away, but she wasn't having it. She stayed locked onto the dark and just wouldn't budge. I just readjusted my stuff, and we pushed on at this point. And as we were walking around the last corner to where the lake had come over the gravel path, I caught sight of something running on 2 legs around the corner towards the water. The boys didn't see it, but this thoroughly freaked me out, and I demanded that Brandon give me the axe in exchange for Angel. We slowly walked forward, and then we all saw it. It was a small humanoid-shaped figure. It was really short, maybe 2 feet tall, and looked as if it just had no neck. I couldn't make out any features on its face or anything because my light wasn't that powerful. It just showed silhouette. Angel started nearly choking herself trying to chase the creature, growling and barking angrily, and upon hearing Angel, it immediately turned and ran towards the water and dove right in. In disbelief, we just kind of stood there listening to it splash around, and then it just started screeching. It sounded aggressive, and honestly, it scared the crap out of all of us. "Boys, go up the bank now," I said to the guys, and we all ran for the bank. Mind you, this bank is about 10 feet high and is nearly straight up and down. We all frantically tried to get up and struggled because of all the gear that we were carrying. Angel was also fighting Brandon, trying to go back and fight the creature, and it was preventing him from getting up the bank. And at this point, I hear the creature get out of the water and start running towards where we were at. It was making this strange kind of gurgling noise as it was running. My fear took over, and I reached down to Brandon, grabbed his pants by the waist, and threw him and Angel both on the top of the bank. I then just yelled, "Trail, run, go, it's coming, the bank." And I wasn't lying, because as we started running, I could hear it scratching at the shale bank behind us, continuing to make the disturbing gurgling noise. We all ran through the woods fighting low-hanging branches, blackberry bushes, spider webs and roots as we hear the creature jump back into the water and screech at us. We ran until we saw what we didn't want to see, the bank again. We had stupidly taken the wrong trail and ended up closer to the water, and therefore the creature too. My brother and Herbie were both in tears at this point, screaming at me, "What the fuck is that thing? What do we do?" So I started swinging the axe and hitting anything that I could to try and scare the creature away. I started screaming back at it, but then we started hearing things walking above us too. I picked up Angel and we all just ran for it and through the bush, and we just made our own path back down to the gravel road. And once we got back to the gravel, we ran as fast as we could back to the Festiva. In a blind panic, I forced the rear hatch open, threw Angel in, shoved Herbie into the back seat, Brandon jumped into the passenger seat, and then I got in. As soon as the car started, I took off as fast as the little Ford would go. And the ride home was very quiet. I broke the silence, though, with the question, Did that really just happen? Is everyone all right?" And they both replied, yes, it really did. But I could tell by the look on their faces that they were both petrified. We stopped at a Waffle House in town for breakfast, and we just kind of sat there quietly eating. Everybody was still freaked out. Even our waitress noticed that we were pale and asked what was wrong. But we made up some lie because Lord knows that there's no way that she would believe us, even if we did tell her. It truly scared us all, and to this day I have no idea what it could have been. I know that it ran on 2 legs, and the screech was just unforgettable. If you've made it this far too, please let me know your thoughts, because I really want to know what you guys think of all this. I live in a rural area that is slowly being developed. My house was built on a wooded lot that is fairly dense and is in an old forest. The trees are really tall, about 2.5 times taller than a 2-story home. And also, my neighborhood, if you can even call it that, is just a few houses built on a pretty long gravel road. But the entirety of the houses are built within this old, dense forest, which extends about a mile in every direction. These homes are only about 3 years old. So I take my dog for a walk on the gravel road several times a day, but the night walks tend to be the most eerie. I've come along coyotes that creepily watch us from the woods until I shout at them. Actually, just a couple of weeks ago, I even walked up on a bear. I've learned to bring a bright 1000 lumen flashlight on my walks after this. But now for the creepy part. So sometimes when walking in these woods, they can just be eerily quiet. Anyone who spent a good amount of time in the woods knows that the woods are actually pretty noisy. However, on these nights, it's virtually silent. No wind in the leaves, and no clacking of swaying tree branches, no crickets, and it's on these nights that I hate these walks. I just get the sensation that I'm being watched. Sometimes I even get goosebumps because the sensation that we're being watched is just so strong. On occasion, I can hear branches or tree limbs snapping, and now, in the thick woods, it's totally normal to hear a random limb break off and fall to the ground. But the sound of a limb breaking naturally versus the sound of one being stepped on are very different. Sometimes I can hear branches snapping more frequently than I should as well, as if several people were hiding in the woods snapping branches off of trees or something. Most times, though, I just hear them around me, but I just can't find a cause. However, 2 nights ago, I heard the branches snapping again, but this was very clearly the sound of intentional branches being snapped this time too. But the sound was coming from high up in the top of the trees. I shined my light up there, but couldn't see anything there, so I just kept walking. Then, more branches snapping. I stopped and looked again, but nothing. I started to walk again, but then another branch in the treetop snapped again. This time I just kept walking, and as I did, I could hear the sound of snapping branches in the treetops following me. This continued for about 2 minutes as I started fast walking to my home, branches being snapped behind me in the trees. Then, tonight, which is what prompted this story, I again had the weird, uncomfortable feeling, but the walk was pretty much uneventful, which was different. As I'm almost home, my dog was sniffing around a bush. He ended up getting a small branch stuck on his leash, so I grabbed the branch and threw it back into the woods, hearing it hit a bush. However, the moment I turned to walk, I heard something behind me which startled us. I turned around to see the same branch. It was a fairly distinct shaped branch, almost like a large but skinny wishbone of a turkey, which I just threw into the woods, back at my feet. I looked into the woods, but there was nothing there, but something had definitely thrown back the branch back at my feet. And at this point, I went straight home after that, completely spooked. I really don't know what's going on, but it seems as if this last week or so that activity has just increased dramatically. I'm really not sure what to think of it all, or if there's some sort of precipitating factor. But either way, I hope you guys found this interesting, and as of now, I'm stopping my walks. This happened to me back in 2011. I was 20 years old and was living with my grandpa and sister. My grandpa was in the hospital at the time, and during the week that he was away, a lot of just weird things would happen at home. So my sister and I would often sleep in the living room. But one night, my sister went out with her friends and left me alone at the house. It was around midnight, and I decided to get some sleep since I had an early class the next morning. I'm afraid of the dark, and I can't fall asleep without some sort of light, so I left the bathroom and the kitchen light on. In my house, it was just enough to partially illuminate the living room, too. So I'm on the couch just trying to fall asleep, and as I'm laying there, I hear the keys in the door. The door opens, and in walks my mum, or at least the silhouette of my mum. I was actually surprised to see her because, well, it was late, and my mum lives about 30 miles outside the city. I asked her what she's doing there, and she told me that she was going to spend the night and go to work from there in the morning. She sounded super irritated, and when I think about it, I couldn't see her face, only the outline of her body and her curly hair. Without my glasses or contacts, my vision sucks pretty bad, and it was somewhat dark in the living room. Anyways, she tells me that she's going to shower and walks down the hall and closes the bathroom door. I'm thinking, okay, random, but whatever, and I look at my phone and it's 1 a.m. now, so I decide to just try and go to sleep for real, and eventually I manage to. I guess some time passes, and I end up jolting awake from my sleep with just an overwhelming sense of dread. I notice that the door to the bathroom is still closed, and I call out to my mum, but I get no answer. I go to the bathroom and open the door, but the room is empty. Getting even more creeped out, I search the entire house calling out for her until I realize eventually that I'm all alone. At this point, I start crying because I'm just too freaked out, so I call my sister and ask where she is. Thankfully, she had just pulled up and was talking to a friend on the driveway. When she comes inside, I told her what happened, and she was obviously really weirded out. I look at my phone and it's a little after 2:30 in the morning, so I force myself to calm down and I go back to sleep. The next morning, I called my mum and asked if she came over the night before, and she sounds confused because she was at her house the entire night. This was the weirdest and creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. I know that I wasn't dreaming and was actually awake when I was talking to this person or thing posing as my mum, but who the hell was I actually talking to? Let me know what you guys think. When I was very little, like 5 or 6 I'd say, my dad used to take me on all sorts of adventures through nature, especially when we owned a little cottage up in the Scottish Highlands. Now, my dad is sort of a combo between an Irish bloke plus a Yorkshire laddie type of fellow and very spry, despite his being about 55 at the time. And on this particular occasion, I decided that we were going to go hiking way up in the cliffs. I was quite happy with this development, as it meant a piggyback ride for at least 90% of the difficult bits. This was a proper trek too. He wanted to get to one of the highest bluffs so that we could have an amazing 360-degree view of the gorgeous meadows and some sparkling sea. But after we reached the top of the plains, where it's all short wind-whipped grass and you can see for miles, he suddenly turned very still and very quiet. But when you're small, your parents are like God, so seeing your dad look frightened is scarier than anything your own mind can come up with. So I was pulling on his arm and going, what? And my mum is actually epileptic, and I saw her fits when I was a kid, so I thought it was happening to him too, or something similar, and I wouldn't know what to do because we're up on this huge cliff and no one is around. When, just as fast as he started it, he snapped out of it. Fireman lifted me right up on his shoulder and just started striding away without a word. Over his shoulder, though, I could see a big yellow pale object stuck in the ground like an obelisk or something. I know now, though, that it was actually a refrigerator. When I was older, and I asked my dad about it too, he just stiffened up and told me that when he was a boy in the 50s, he and his little friends had found an old-style fridge in the woods, and being little boys, they opened it. And well, of course, they had found a body. Another child who, by whichever means, had found themselves in the fridge and unable to get out. My dad has never mentioned a gender, which leads me to believe that he either witnessed a very decomposed or skeletonized individual, but I can't ask him. Remember that episode of The Simpsons where they unlock Homer's PTSD and it turns out that he found a dead body when he was a teenager? Well, my dad grew increasingly uncomfortable the first time that he saw that episode and had excused himself to the kitchen before the ending. My dad has seen some pretty gnarly shit in his life, but for whatever reason, he just will not discuss anything further about this dead child in the fridge, only that it happened. So when he explained, I assumed it was the trauma, and I said something like, "Oh, Dad, that's awful. So when you saw the fridge up there, it brought up all those old memories, right?" And he honestly looked at me with his big blue eyes like I was an idiot. And I'll never forget what he said. "No, Amy," he said in a very low tone. "It was because it was the same fridge." I'd like to preface this by saying that I do not believe in ghosts. So I was walking through the woods after fishing for the better part of the day, and I decided to stay out real late and try and fish up some bullheads from a local watering hole. I was only about 13 and stayed out way later than I normally would. Usually I would take a trail home, but decided to cut through some thicker brush to get to my grandparents' house so that I could call my mum. I knew that she'd probably be freaking out a bit, even though this happened from time to time. There was an abandoned graveyard on my route too. I don't remember what the story was about it, but I knew it was there. I had wandered past it before, never really checked it out. It's all just overgrown and wild anyway. And I knew that if I followed on the outskirts of the graveyard that I'd hit the road and be home free. The day had been pretty chill overall for a late spring day, but I swear, in my teenage brain, that it was just getting colder. I remember looking at my breath and thinking how weird it was that it hadn't gotten so cold. It was overall a pretty bright night, a near full moon, but in the woods it was really hard to see. The graveyard was wide open, no trees, and it was well lit. As I was walking up, I noticed that the ground was covered in a thin layer of fog, and remember looking into the graveyard and not really registering what I saw at first. It was a person, which at first didn't seem odd, so I kept quiet and walked into the woods a bit more so I didn't get spotted. I didn't know who it was, so I just wanted to keep clear at this point. I stepped behind some of the trees and lost sight of them for a moment, and when I came back around the tree, they were just gone. Which was weird because I was behind the tree for maybe a few seconds tops. I didn't hear anything, and I walked a bit further, keeping an eye out, and at this point, I must admit that I was a bit creeped out. Near the graveyard was a rundown barn of sorts, I suppose. I'm not really sure what it was, but as I got closer to it, I could see that someone was inside. I got a good look at them too, and it was a woman, probably in her 50s. The way the moonlight hit her made her look incredibly pale too. And strangely, she seemed to be digging, but I didn't hear anything. No sounds of a shovel or her making noise in any way, and I was maybe 30 feet away, so I should have heard something. I could see that she stopped though, and then she just disappeared behind some debris. And at this point, I decided to get the heck out of there and quickly moved to get out of the road. I tried to keep track of her, looking for where she went, but I just couldn't find her. It was like she just literally disappeared. I kept trucking though and came out to the road. The fog was pretty much covering the road at this point, a small country road, fields on one side and woods on the other. As I walked down the road, she would just randomly appear in front of me at times, and I started hiding and basically playing cat and mouse with her. Each time I saw her, she was hard to see, only in the moonlight and stuck to the remnants of some of the old houses nearby. She always looked pale and just never made any noise. Once I got past the part of the road which had a number of barn foundations and home remnants, I never saw her again, and it instantly started getting warmer. It creeped me out so much too that I just never went back that way again. I don't know who or what that was, but I told my uncle about it and he went and checked it out, thinking that maybe someone was trying to excavate the graves. But when he got back, he said that there wasn't anything messed with. And in the end, they thought that I was lying. It still gives me the shakes just typing this out, because I know it was most likely someone wandering around looking for stuff or checking the place out. But what teenage me remembers just didn't seem natural. It was also weird that she just never made any noise. She also seemed to be able to just appear and move around me. At one point she was right behind me, and I swear a moment later that she was in front of me again. So we were out camping, but we were way out in the middle of nowhere on BLM land in Colorado. We drove for an hour and a half down a Forest Service road and didn't see another soul the whole time. You could definitely see headlights and hear cars for miles away from our campsite. In other words, it's not like somebody could have just snuck up unnoticed. So, we had 3 cars with us and 8 people. Just got done eating, cleaned up, it was getting dark, so we went to the cars real quick before hitting our tents for the night. And somebody had slashed the front tire on each of the 3 cars with what appeared to be a box cutter. Everyone thought it was a prank, but it became very apparent quickly that it wasn't. All of us were beyond spooked, like panicking a bit, scary to watch spooked. We all had spares and one dude had a gun, so we threw in our donuts while the guy literally guarded us, and then we just got the hell out of there. I still have nightmares about it sometimes though, just knowing that there was some person, probably watching us, maybe wanting to even harm us, just standing out there in the darkness. And it makes me feel physically ill to this day. My dad and I went hiking a few days ago, and my dad is a waterfall fanatic. He wants to see as many as possible in his life. So, he and I are hiking along a very pretty trail. We're hiking along a river, it's flowing nicely, there's mountains all around us. The trail is weaving around these big, beautiful boulders. I'm hiking at most 30 feet ahead of him, I'd say, looking for a spot to stop and have a sit down for a picnic lunch, and as I rounded a blind curve in the trail, I just freeze. Sitting on a stump, maybe 10 feet off to the right of the trail, is a guy. But he's wearing one of those colourful Baja hoodies with the hood pulled up and a half mask with rabbit ears. He sees me and stands up right as my dad rounds the corner. We're all three sizing each other up in silence, and my dad addresses him. "Hey, what's up, buddy?" The masked man tips his head as if he was deciding what to do with us, and then he says back, "Not much, man. You aren't the guys I'm waiting for. Have a good day." Then he turns and jogs off quickly into the woods. Strapped on his lower back was a large hunting knife, and he also had a pistol on his hip. We lost sight of him pretty quickly. We hadn't seen a soul on the trail all day, and we'd been hiking for almost 3 hours. Needless to say, we left the waterfall for another day and just quickly turned around. Once we were off the trail, we reported it to the local Forest Service and the police, but they said that they couldn't do much aside from keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. The masked guy didn't have a backpack or water or pretty much anything, which makes me think that he either stashed it somewhere or was maybe camping and waiting nearby. I hate to admit it, but I desperately wanted to go after the guy and ask who he was actually waiting for and why. This story starts around So as a bit of a background here, I'm 21 now and still live at home while trying to get into school and whatnot. This house was brand new when we moved in, just built, so we were the first to live in it. My experiences aren't so much creepy as they are just strange, I think. Or maybe I've just become numb to them or something. Anyway, here it goes. So, my first experience I ever had was when I was 12. I used to have a cable box hooked up to my computer monitor in my bedroom. One night, around 11 p.m. I'd say, I was woken to my monitor turning on and the TV blaring at max volume. It scared the living hell out of me and my cat too. I jumped out of bed and quickly turned it off, and just as it fell quiet, I heard footsteps in our laundry room and the door to the garage slamming shut. A few days later, I was up in bed reading, and I glanced up to my doorway, and I remember clear as day a pure white face peeking in before casually moving out of view. A few months after this incident, I'd been going into the kitchen one night, again around 11 p.m, to grab a late night snack. But for some fucking reason, I decided not to turn any lights on my way there and would just turn on my kitchen lights instead. Well, at the end of the hallway, just before entering the kitchen, I looked to my left towards where our dinner table was, and something was standing there behind the table in the corner. And I shit you not, it looked like someone just standing there with a bedsheet over them or something. I stared for what must have been a solid 10 seconds, calm, and then just casually went to turn on the light. I looked back, and whatever had been there was now gone. After these incidents, things became relatively calm again. I remember small incidences like seeing things out of the corner of my eye. I usually chalked it up to I just wasn't sleeping enough, but everything I thought I saw just felt too real to be imaginary. There had been a night too, around 1 a.m. I think, when I was in the living room just watching television on the couch, and out of nowhere, there was a loud bang against the window behind the couch. It sounded like a huge bird hit it, which I guess is possible, but at 1 a.m. that seems pretty unlikely if you ask me. I was too afraid to look and ended up just convincing myself that maybe an owl hit the window or something. After a while, too, things started to go missing. When I was 13, my dad, he woke me up earlier than usual one morning just asking me where my lunch bag went. I told him that it was in the same place as always, the second pocket in my backpack. I got up to check for myself and it wasn't there. Confused, I just assumed that I left it at school or something and went back to sleep. Around an hour later, that same morning, I checked my bag a second time and there was my lunch bag in the same pocket it was supposed to be. Dad swore to me that he never found it, and I believed him honestly because checking the bag leftovers from yesterday's lunch, they were still in there. But this was one of the strangest things out of all of my experiences, and honestly, I just can't explain it. When I was about 14, I came home from school one day and found that the faucet for the tub had been disassembled and set neatly in a pile on the toilet. I called my dad and he also swore again that he didn't touch it and actually ended up blaming me for it. At 15, this one's a little bit funny to be honest. I was taking a shower and noticed the water had gotten significantly colder. There was no way that I'd used up all the hot water yet, so I turned around and saw the handle had been turned to cold. This asshole of a ghost, or whatever it was trying to get me to wash my hair with cold water like I should have in the first place. But now for the two scariest stories that I want to share with you guys. One might not have been paranormal at all, but hey, I'll let you guys decide for yourself. It could have just been an animal, but it was terrifying nonetheless. So, I was 17 at the time, and I've always had a fear of looking at windows at night. I can't explain it. It just kind of terrifies me to my core. But one night, I'd been laying in bed just Skyping my girlfriend when I glanced to my window. My bed is set right against the window, so I'm kind of laying against it almost. One of my blinds was crooked, kind of allowing me to see outside, and when I looked, two eyes, reflective ones, were staring right back at me. My house is a one-story, but my window is way too high off the ground for a raccoon or a possum to just peer through like that. Whatever it was stared at me for a solid 10 seconds before just disappearing. I made my girlfriend Skype with me until I fell asleep for 5 nights after that too, because it honestly just scared the crap out of me. And the most recent event was just last week. It was about 4 in the morning and I got up to use the bathroom in the hallway. As I was leaving the bathroom, I stopped and looked to my right directly into the kitchen just a few feet away. It took me a second to realize, but something was standing there. And as soon as I realized it, it quickly just walked off. Both my parents were asleep at the time, I can confirm that. And just a few days ago, my girlfriend had been using the bathroom when she texted me asking if I was in the bathroom. The bath is sectioned off by 2 areas, and the toilet and the bath have a door between the sinks. And she swore that she heard a thud on the counter and something being moved around. Anyway, thanks to anyone who listened to this, and I can't explain any of it, and I'm all ears if you guys have any ideas.
Wish you didn't have to pay full price for Nintendo gear? Wikibuy can help with that. It automatically compares Amazon's prices to other sellers and notifies you when there's a better deal. Get Wikibuy for free.
Ah, there it is. Kawhi, what are you doing here?
I'm blocking you from overpaying.
Well, finding deals is hard.
Nah, acting in a commercial is hard. Saving money is easy. Just use Honey. Let me show you. Just click and save.
Thanks, Kawhi.
This laptop is tiny.
It's normal size.
You can get the best deals at joinhoney.com.
So a little background before I get to the story. So, my family and I moved into a new house when I was 14. It was newly built, and we were the first to live in it. It was my parents, my sister, and I, and throughout the years, we'd have family get-togethers and parties where everyone has a great time. When I was 15, however, at one of these family get-togethers, I was sitting in the living room with one of my cousins while everyone else was in the dining room or in the front room. The living room is connected to the kitchen, so no matter where you sit, you can always either see the trash can, which it had a flipped lid, or the table. While me and my cousin were just chatting, something caused us both to turn our heads. We saw the trash can's lid flip on its own. We got up to check, confused if anyone had gotten up to throw something away, and no. Everyone was still playing a game or chatting in the same space. We figured that it was the vent above the trash can that made it flip, or something. Neither one of us said anything about it again, but we were both pretty creeped out by it. So we also had a babysitter who would stay with us occasionally because my father was on a tour in Iraq and my mother worked nights. I know it's ridiculous for a 14-year-old to have a babysitter, but my mother felt that it was necessary. Besides, the babysitter was only 5 years older than me, so I enjoyed our talks and time together. She slept in the guest bedroom for a while before I noticed that she started sleeping downstairs. One day, I asked her why she didn't sleep in the room, and her face turned pale, and she quietly asked, "Hey, have you ever had anything weird happen to you in this house?" I looked at her confused, but remembered the trash can incident. I didn't reply, though, and she just kept looking at me and then said, "You know, I'm probably going to sound crazy, but I think your guest room has something in it." I continued to look at her, not saying a word, and she continued. "One night, I got up because I felt like something was just wrong, and I went to check on you guys, and you were both sleeping, so I went back to bed. But laying there, I started to notice the statue doll you have on the nightstand was staring at me. Like staring, but I turned around and I started falling back to sleep. And that's when I heard these whispers coming from the vent. I thought it was you guys again, but when I checked, you were both still asleep." She ended the conversation and went to sit on the couch, leaving me there kind of just baffled. But ever since that night, I started getting a bad feeling in my gut. When I was 17, we got a new dog who was a Chihuahua. She slept in my sister's room with her every night, and one night, I woke up to my sister just standing over me. And she said to me, "Can I sleep with you? The dog is freaking me out." I couldn't respond as I had just woken up and just kind of scooted over for her. In the morning, however, I asked my sister what had happened. She replied, "Well, I don't know. I was about to go to sleep when the dog sat up from my lap and just started whining and looking at the vent. She started barking, and that's when I took her and just went to your room." Again, I didn't respond. After a couple of days, I was still thinking about it, and it only hit me then about the babysitter that we used to have, when she said, "I heard whispers coming from the vent." I tried to shake it off because a couple of weeks later, my little cousins were spending the night. So on one night, one of them slept in my sister's room, and the other, they slept with me in my room. I didn't dare want to sleep in the guest room, so I slept on the floor with my cousins on my bed. Eventually I fall asleep, but my room was pitch black when I woke up in the middle of the night. My doors to my bedroom closet were open as I had gotten out a blanket earlier. I don't know why, but I suddenly started to feel nervous. I kept looking at my closet too, and I had an iDog, which was a robotic dog that you connected to your iPod to do music, and it would play out of the speaker from its back. And depending on what music you played, it showed you its emotions by colors that turned on in the front of its face. Green was happy, yellow was for mellow, and red was for when it was mad. I remember that I hadn't touched it in weeks because it kind of ran out of batteries, and I hadn't gotten new ones, so I just left it on the shelf on the top of my closet. As I was staring into my closet, I started to hear growling, and I saw the iDog's face started to light up red. It barked and moved back and forth, and I reached up to my cousin to wake her up, but she was out of my reach and I was too scared to move. So I just sat there, staring. And finally, it stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of the night that night, and in the morning, I threw my eye dog in the trash bin. Since then, I've kept my closet doors closed with a rope unless I'm changing clothes or something. But I noticed that there was a vent near the closet too. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this now, having almost forgotten everything, is because recently my boyfriend has been spending the night a lot. I'm 25 now and still living at home while I'm finishing school, and my sister lives in New York for the most part because of school too. My father and mother split up a while back, so he moved out, and my mum goes out a lot with her friends. So it's usually me and my boyfriend alone. My room only has a one-person fit bed, so we sleep in the guest room since my boyfriend likes to take up a lot of space when he moves around at night. One night, my mum was out of town for a weekend trip. I had just gotten out of the bathroom and walked into the room where my boyfriend was examining the vent. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Hey, I could have sworn that I saw something coming out of this thing, but there's nothing now. Maybe it was just a bug or something. Do you have problems with that sort of thing here?" I must admit that I didn't pay much attention since we decided to just go to sleep right away. But I woke up in the middle of the night because I just had a nightmare, and I actually just recently suffered from PTSD, so it wasn't uncommon lately that I would have night terrors or whatnot. But anywho, I woke up and looked over at my boyfriend who had his back against me and was snoring away. I got up to take some pills and returned to the room. When I did, my boyfriend was standing under the vent. I jokingly said, "What, did the bed bugs come back?" He didn't reply. I then sat on the bed, and the only light that was in the room was coming from the moon from the window. I then said, "Hey babe, come back to bed." But he still didn't reply. Then I said, "Babe, you're starting to freak me out." He turned, confused, like, "Your mum is out of town, right?" I nodded, not knowing where he was going with this, and then he said, "Sorry, I don't mean to scare you, but it's the weirdest thing, but I swear that she was calling for help." "What? What do you mean?" I asked, getting scared. "Well, I heard her yell faintly for help, but it was coming from the vent." We decided that he was probably dreaming in the end, and we just went back to sleep. Well, he did at least. The next weekend, my boyfriend had fallen asleep first, and I stayed up reading. When I finished, I turned off the light and cuddled with my boyfriend. When I was just about to drift off, I could have sworn that I heard my sister call me. I looked up and there was nothing there. I figured it was just me about to start dreaming, so I turned back to go to sleep. And again, I heard my sister call me. This time, it was clear, and I looked at the direction of the sound, and it was coming from the vent. I kept looking, waiting, and then I heard, "Over here." I knew I wasn't dreaming this time, and I knew it had whispered that. I immediately shook my boyfriend awake to tell him what happened, and he insisted that I was dreaming like he did the week before and tried to calm me down. He hasn't spent the night since because I don't want to sleep in the guest room, and I don't want to sleep in my room either. I don't know what it is, but I just feel like the boogeyman is in my vents just waiting to come and get me, trying to lure me under it for something. And I'll tell you this much, as soon as I can, I'm moving out of here. This has left me feeling extremely shook, and I'd love some opinions on this, especially from someone with experience. So, last year, I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into a national forest. I like to camp in national parks and forests because it's kind of isolated, so my dog can roam and they're free of charge. It's a trade-off for sketchy and rough drives into the park sometimes for lack of service and assistance. Anyway, I was driving up this dirt road kind of curling up a mountain around maybe 5 p.m. I think. It was very nice out, sunny and warm with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and that feeling just didn't let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I even texted my boyfriend about it for as long as I could before my phone completely lost service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but didn't see anything. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel and some broken glass mixed in with the dirt and gravel road. Yuka, my dog, starts growling slightly. She is vocal, but I've almost only ever seen or heard her growl at or with other dogs. I did see her growling at a possum once, so it could have been something that she smelt, maybe. The place continued to make me feel quite on edge, though, but I pride myself on being an independent traveller and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a bit further with my grumbling pup to see if I could find a good place to camp. As we continue, though, I begin to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind that no one is going to be going more than, say, 5 or 10 miles per hour up this thing, and that's if there's anyone even here. I hear men's voices, and they sound close, and I think I should call out to them, so I stop my car, but then just kind of freeze up and feel like I shouldn't. I can't really make out what they're saying, and I don't see any sign of people anywhere, and I get back into my car and continue to slowly drive forward and cautiously, looking for where the voices could be coming from. Strange thing is, I've never run into other people in a national park or forest when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling grows too about the voices, which have sort of come and gone a few times, and I give up and begin to turn my car around at this point. I honestly don't remember how Yuka was acting on the way down, because I was scared and focused on just getting out of there. I just distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside of my car. But kind of dangerously quickly, I went back down the mountain not seeing any sign of anyone. In the end, I decided to spring for luxury and got a hotel for the night. I figured that I was just fine, and it was just huge and open spaces that can be intimidating, I told myself. And the voices could have just been echoing from somewhere far off, and they just sounded close. Animals die, glass gets broken, nothing happened. Cool. But I remember this place, and it sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling that I had driving up that mountain, and it's honestly kind of interesting to me as well as frightening. But I recently happened across some information as well as some Native American law that made me feel extremely uneasy about the whole thing. So, fast forward a year, and I've mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing much more. I googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but it didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature, hence my fascination in this little event. So my boyfriend and I were coming off and finishing our road trip just yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2 or 3 hours left and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. We went from the No Sleep podcast to the X-Files and ended up on a True Scary Stories video dealing with Native American lore. I'm kind of half paying attention, just petting my dog, playing Pokemon on an emulator, and I hear the narrator mention Wendigos. It very briefly says what they are and casually mentions that they can mimic voices. I mean it when I say the most horrible chills that I've ever had in my life crawl down my spine, and I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest that I was freaked out about last year. He says that he does, and he reminds me that he texted me that I was probably close to a Wendigo. And I look back into that text and he actually did. I also remember him saying that, but didn't know much about their lore and thought that he was just being funny, like, yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you or something. And he was like, no. I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically because you said that you were hearing voices that you couldn't find a trace of. I feel really strange about this, and I start Googling Wendigos and find more information, etc., etc. But they're allegedly able to mimic human voices, and they would live in that sort of area, and it just kind of all matched up. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable info out there, but I tried to find some more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I then specifically looked up missing persons in the area, and the first headline that catches my eyes is another family goes missing. And I went through different websites and news articles of people going missing, but they're all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees and whatnot. But I remembered looking up the forest about a year ago and didn't see anything, and realized that these stories just didn't seem to be talked about much, which also piqued my intuition. It was stated that well over 100 people in the past 8 years have gone missing and not been found there, on top of many which are just found dead. And the whole thing just has my intuition super spiked. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I just wanted to get out of there just terrifies me. And I felt so uneasy about what I was hearing and still do to this day. My dog and I are very close. She was actually a stray that started following me one day, and I ended up bringing her home from Costa Rica. So her little growls along the way just makes me feel like there was something wrong and more to the whole thing. I've done a lot of solo traveling both in and out of the country, and I have to say that I've never had such a bad feeling, on top of seeing an unnecessary amount of dead animals in a national forest, which just seems strange. I don't think I'll be doing any more solo traveling unless it's around civilization from now on, but does anyone know about authentic Native American lore, or has anyone else had a kind of inexplicable experience like this? Extra points if you've had any bad vibes in national forests from California too. So I've had weird experiences my whole life, and to be honest, you'll probably hear more from me on here. But this is the first time that I've told anyone about anything that's happened to me, and this happened a few years ago, and I wanted to share it with you guys to maybe get some answers. So, at the time, I was living with my parents, and I was probably 19 or 20, I think. I had 2 cats that slept in my room during the night, and another detail worth noting is that my room was set up with my bed against the wall across from the door, a dresser at the end of the bed, and the closet was across to the left of the dresser, so the opposite corner of my bed. My ceiling fan had one of those remote controls for the settings and the light too. A super cool feature for me because I hated getting out of bed to turn the lights off and all. Anyway, it was like mid-November, I think, and I don't remember what time it was that I woke up. I just know that it was the middle of the night. I don't know what prompted me to wake up so suddenly, but when I did, I heard a shuffle in my closet. I kept the litter boxes in my closet and the left door slightly cracked for the cats to get in and out, so I assumed that it was just one of them in the closet. But when I turned over, my boy was right next to me where he always sleeps, and this made me prop up a little bit to see where my other cat was. I saw her silhouette in the dark, sound asleep at the foot of my bed, and my mind was really tired, and to be honest, I just didn't care for the annoyance of being woken up in the middle of the night, so my head hit the pillow once again. Keep in mind, I've dealt with strange things my whole life, so I didn't think much of the noise in the closet. As I was starting to drift off, though, I heard something slide across the floor from my closet to the end of my bed. The sound could be best described as a stuffed animal or a cat toy sliding across the floor. I glanced over once again to see both cats asleep, and now I began to panic. In the dark, still laying down trying to be as invisible as possible, I felt around for the remote to the light. I quickly found it and pressed the button, and nothing. And then I felt something jump up onto the bed at the foot. It felt about the size of my cat, so it was a small animal or creature-like. Now, what happened in this moment was just so terrifying that I don't even remember what happened with my cats. I'm not sure if they woke up and ran or were just unfazed completely. But this thing moved up my bed. I could feel the pressure and the movement of the sheets around me. I kept pressing the damn light button, but nothing was happening. And then this thing is on top of me all of a sudden, just scratching me. I started screaming, hoping that my parents down the hall would come in and save me, and I'm not sure if my screams were actual words like help or just terrifyingly screaming at the top of my lungs. But the creature felt like it had fur or hair or something. I never actually saw it, and that could have been because I closed my eyes out of fear, or it was just too dark or something, but it started speaking to me. I don't exactly remember the sound of its voice, only that it kept telling me, it's October. And now, there was obviously confusion added to my terror. I mean, it was November, not October. So was this thing trying to tell me that its name was October or something? Or trying to tell me something about October? I was just too terrified at the time to question anything though, and I just kept screaming. And then, all of a sudden, the scratching just stopped and it just disappeared. I mean, the creature just literally vanished before my eyes. I clicked the button once again and the light finally turned on. I still don't remember where my cats ended up being, and I don't even remember falling back to sleep. But what I do remember is the next morning, and having scratches on my stomach. But here's the even weirder part. When I told my parents about it, and more importantly, questioned why the hell they didn't come running when I was screaming, they said that they never heard me screaming. And my mum told me that she woke up feeling like something was watching her, and she looked up to see these eyes just staring at her from across the room. She explained to me that they looked like owl eyes, and the silhouette was of a small animal type thing. And then my dad told me about a dream that he had about a small furry creature, but I don't remember the rest of what he told me. And I don't know what this creature was or what it wanted, and more importantly, what is the significance of October? Was it a demon, or was it just sleep paralysis? I often question my sanity about this, but both my parents had similar encounters which validated my experience too. Has anyone else had a similar encounter? Or does anyone have any info on what this creature could have been? I mean, the whole event just still gives me chills to this day. So a bit of backstory first. So my ex-boyfriend and I, we're still very good friends and occasional friends with benefits. He and I sometimes have threesomes with friends of his. Please don't judge my sex life. And I recently went drinking with my ex Carter and his friend Paul. Recently, as in about 2 days ago. So, Carter and Paul showed up Sunday morning at 7:30 a.m. Cart wanted to drink with me since he's being put on probation soon and won't be able to. So I went with them and got to know Paul a little. He's 22, but just broke up with his girlfriend of a year and decided to just avoid relationships entirely. He has a slightly huskier build with an oval face and slightly beady blue eyes. His blonde hair is in a crew cut, and his style of glasses kind of made him resemble the BTK killer. Anyway, Cart and Paul and I did our thing, and then Paul offered to give me a ride back home. Cart had his license taken away and has to go to classes to get it back and all. I didn't want to walk home later, as it was supposed to be a bitching hot day, so I accepted. He drove me home, asking if we could pull over and do it before he dropped me off, but I declined. I really only sleep with his friends because it's something that he enjoys, and I just want to make Cart happy. So he dropped me off and told me that he would hit me up to hang out sometime, but made it very clear that he wasn't looking for a relationship, which I was totally okay with. He added me on Snapchat, but didn't try to talk to me, so I figured he was just another faceless person from mine and Cart's sexual misadventures. But I woke up at 2:30 a.m. today to Paul sitting on my bed. He squeezed my leg, which is what woke me up, And at first, I thought it was my brother JJ because he gets nightmares sometimes and will come into my room. But then, I realized how weird it would be if he grabbed my thigh to wake me up, so I opened my eyes and saw him just staring over me. Hey, you texted me earlier, so I thought I'd stop by. I definitely hadn't texted him. After he left, I checked my phone too to make sure I hadn't, and I was right. There was no conversation between us at all. But I was very groggy and not really comprehending the situation, so I told him how late it was, turned away from him, and told him to just leave. Are you sure you don't want me to stay? Are you okay? I came over to hang out. He kept his hand on my thigh the entire time. I was fully awake at this point and had this growing sense of just, this is bad in my stomach. I repeated that he needed to go, and he finally stood up, telling me to call him tomorrow. I grumbled, sure, whatever, dude, just get the hell out. He stood there for a minute and then asked me to walk him out to his car. I told him no, obviously, and he asked me if I was sure I didn't want to walk him out. He was, oddly, pretty insistent on it too, but I told him that he just needed to leave now, and I need my sleep and I have to be up at 6:45. I heard him start walking down the hallway, and my chest finally relaxed a little. That is, until he came back in. Hey, there's someone downstairs, so I really need you to walk me out, okay? I was mad at this point. Paul had interrupted my sleep, broken into my house. Now he had the audacity to demand that I walk him out of the house that he just broke into. Paul, I'm not getting out of bed. Just go out the back door. Nobody's going to say anything to you, okay? He got the hint, and I heard him walk downstairs, and I heard the door shut. I waited about a half an hour before going downstairs and made sure that he was gone, and made sure that the doors were locked too. I told my aunt when she woke up at around 4 what happened, and she told me to come and get her next time. I also texted Carter about what happened, and I don't want to tell my dad or uncles what happened. I don't want them to blame Carter, but I know I have to. But what happened tonight was just so weird, especially with how normal Paul was acting about it. For a minute there, I thought I was overreacting and that because I'm a bit of a slut, that Paul was allowed to do this or something. But my aunt pointed out that no normal guy would do this, and it's not mine nor Cart's fault. I'm going to ask JJ to sleep in my room tomorrow, just in case Paul comes back. So, today, I was staying in a hotel about 275 miles or so from home. I've been in the city for a couple of days, but we just switched hotels last night due to the fact that the other one was mold infested and gross. Anyways, we're here to drop my brother off at college, and tonight was his last night with us before we left. We decided to have a silly string fight in the hotel parking lot, run around the outside of the hotel, and just fun, stupid teenager things. Somebody was actually on the top of the stairs that led to the second floor of the motel watching and staring at us, which was no big deal though. I mean, we were being pretty loud and obnoxious after all. But my brother and my mum left to bring my brother back to his dorm room, and I decided to stay behind at the hotel room as all I had been doing for the past 3 days was riding in a car, and I just needed a break. And I was on the phone with my friend, Adrian. So I was just talking to Adrian when, all of a sudden, someone knocks on the door the same exact way that my mum does. We have one of those silly little secret knocks. I was about to swing open the door per usual, as I was 99% certain that it was my mother, but something just told me to look out the peephole for some reason. And the person standing outside my hotel room door was the same person watching us earlier on the top of the stairs. Now, I'm very paranoid, so obviously I just didn't answer the door. And I started freaking out and talking to Adrian quietly, and the person yells, "Open this fucking door," and starts banging harder on the door. I sit there just talking quietly to Adrian for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then, slowly, walk back up to the door and go to look through the peephole, when All of a sudden, this person slams their body weight against the door and starts viciously shaking the handle. At this point, I text my brother on Snapchat at least 30 times to come back to the hotel. He says they're about 10 minutes away and just to sit tight and that he's coming back. He does, and by the time that they get back, the person is gone. After everything that's gone down, I'm still pretty shaken up by this. Last night too, I went to the front desk as we were leaving to go take my brother back to his dorm. I decided to go with him when they come back to the hotel and told them if anyone asked for a keycard to my room to not give it to them, as with this motel, they don't require any ID or proof of being in that room. You just have to ask for the key to the room number and they apparently just give it to you. And apparently, my paranoia paid off, because according to the front desk clerk, the same person came and asked for a key to my room. I'm not sure what would have happened if I would have opened that door or if they would have managed to obtain a key to my room, but man, I do not want to find out. So there's this hiking trail close to the school that I go to. It's about 2 miles to the top, I think, and it has a beautiful view over the entire valley. So my friends and I went up one Saturday, and the sun was beginning to set right as we started the 2-mile walk down. Terrible timing, I know, but luckily we know the trail. Everything is good. Creepy though, because it's getting dark and I'm a little bit paranoid about being out here. I'm not really paying attention, but I hear my friends say, "What's up?" I don't have good eyesight, so I looked, but I didn't see anything. "Hey, it's a girl," my guy friend said. I was freaked because, it's 9 o'clock on a hiking trail that not a single other person is on. As we get closer, I see that she's sitting on the ground in what looks like a pile of leaves with her knees to her chest. She's also rocking back and forth in only a pink nightgown. And it's February. My friends and I chalk it up to someone being on a terrible trip in the woods or something. Feeling bad since that actually happened to my friend once, we debated asking if she needed help. That was until my friend saw that she was actually cradling a knife in her lap. And fuck that, I thought. I'm out of here. More freaked out, we pick up our pace but still think the girl could just be tripping. We start joking and saying that it must be a terrible trip in the woods at night to try and calm ourselves down and all that, but then we see a man running frantically up the trail, asking if we've seen his daughter. This girl was apparently about 20, not a little girl, although she was dressed like one. We say, no, we haven't seen her, because we were freaked the hell out, thinking that we may have just seen a girl who escaped a kidnapper or something. As you can guess, we just ran the rest of the way after this. Unfortunately, where we were parked, there wasn't a single other car to call and give a license plate number to either. But we did call and report what we saw, and they searched, but we never heard an update. To this day, I don't know what was happening in those woods, but I don't know if I ever even want to. By the way, there was no cell service until we got to our car, and we saw the girl when we were about a mile from our car, and it was almost pitch black, mind you. We had no way of being able to continue to watch her because it was just way too dark. We were also a group of 2 female and a male with nothing for self-defense unless we were able to find something. If I'm being honest, it was just a really scary situation, and I was frozen in fear, and we had no way of knowing if someone was using a female to lure us in or what it was. I kind of regret not saying something, but we did as much as we could while trying to keep ourselves safe. Anyway, like I said, I have no idea what was going on out there, but it was weird. This is something that happened to me just a couple of months ago. So, I love Facebook, I love memes, I love talking to new people, I love long comment sections, all that stuff. But that being said, I never give away personal information such as where I work or live, and my birthday info is private, so on and so forth. I've made quite a few friends that I don't know personally, in fact, but agree with or had really good discussions with. So, after commenting back and forth on a friend's post for a while, it was no surprise to me when Tyler messaged me. It started off fairly simple. I mean, we just talked about the post that we commented on, how do you do's, common interests, all that type of stuff. I was honestly excited to have a new friend, and he seemed pretty interesting, and we had a lot in common too. I'm not a beauty queen or anything, but I let him know after about half an hour of casual conversation that I was taken happily. I enjoyed his friendship, but it wouldn't lead into anything more since I'm going to get married next year anyway. He seemed a little upset, to be honest, but respectful for the most part, which was good enough for me. I told him good night, went to sleep, and thought nothing of it. The conversation continued for a few days, though, and he started to get a little pushy if I didn't respond immediately, and told him that I was very busy, so I may not always answer right away, and he apologized for that and told me that he's just bored and lonely. I started to put a little distance between us, though, because he didn't really back down, but I didn't want to completely give up on my new friendship because I hated the fact that he was so lonely. One day, he randomly messaged me saying that he wanted to have me in his arms, though. I immediately nipped that in the bud, reminding him of my relationship and telling him that if he didn't stop, then our friendship will be done because I respect and am loyal to my fiancé about anyone else. And he immediately lost his shit, messaging me saying that he didn't care about my fiancé, making threats towards him and all that stuff. I stopped messaging him after this and selected to put his messages on ignore. He could still message me, but it wouldn't go to my inbox anymore. I made a post about it too, and a friend of mine commented and said that he had done the same thing to her, except he knew where she lived and would show up outside of her house, in fact. At this point, I freaked out and went to see if there were more messages from him because she told me that he was bad news and I should call the police if any threats were being made. And this is where the shitstorm really began. So he had messaged me over a dozen times, different things. It started off kind of taunting me for not answering, and then moved into him messaging me about some asshole who cut him off as he was driving too slow for his taste or something. Then to him saying that he was going to shoot the guy, and it would be my fault because I made him so angry by ignoring him. I messaged him telling me to just leave me the hell alone and stopped replying for a while. But he started messaging me and narrowing down where I live. And that really freaked me out, as I'd never told him where I lived or anything even remotely close to my house. The only thing I'd ever said was I'd talk to him later because I was going to Arby's to get some food and my phone was dying. Yet he somehow knew that I was 7 minutes away from the Arby's by my house, exactly how long it takes to walk there for me, and there are several Arby's in my city. Then he started narrowing down to what street I lived off of, down to knowing a 4-door black sedan was linked to my address, which, mind you, there was, but it wasn't in my name. It was in my sister's name when she registered it as an Uber. And that was enough for me, and I called the non-emergency line. The police refused to do anything, of course, saying until he actually showed up or did something that there was nothing that they could do. Never mind that he was sending me pictures of dead people and saying that he was going to be my family and was narrowing down my address and all. But unless he actually showed up, I was pretty much screwed. All I could do was apply for a protective order, and so I did. Tyler kept messaging me though, so I told him that there was a protective order in place and he needed to leave me alone. He responded with there was nothing that could be done until he was served and signed it, which, to be honest, was true. My fiancé is actually in IT and has a cousin who's pretty tech-savvy as well, and they managed to get the last couple of addresses Tyler had, but the police couldn't find him at either of those. We had license plate numbers and addresses and full names and birthdays, yet he seemed pretty much completely untraceable. Strangely enough, though, he actually stopped for a while, but the day of my court case to have the PO extended for 2 years, he started up again. My fiance actually filed criminal charges for the threats that he made, and he said that someone could come shoot you in 15 minutes. His last known address was actually a 15-minute drive away from my house, which was really creepy too. I've spent the last couple of months completely afraid, and he was actually arrested and served finally. I think he was speeding or something, and it turns out he has a history of this. Multiple charges, all dropped and dismissed, of course, but he's done it to a couple of my friends who showed up to my court case for the criminal charges. They dropped everything from felonies to a misdemeanor disorderly conduct charge, with 12 months suspended jail time depending on his behavior because they couldn't prove that it was him and not someone else behind the keyboard. Especially with me never seeing his face in real life before this court date, even though I had 2 people who had received messages from him and seen him face to face as well. Anyway, currently I can't sleep, and the slightest noise wakes me up panicking, and it's been just hell for my family. I just really hope that this whole thing ends soon. When I was little, around 7 I'd say, I lived with my mum and my sister. We have different dads but the same mum. My mother and father had separated a couple of years before and lived apart, and my dad lived about 2 hours away, and I saw him every other weekend. Since the separation, my mum had gone on various dates with different people, but they never really worked out. At this point, I would also like to mention that my mum drank a lot of alcohol. She had a hard life, and alcohol had been a way for her to cope with it, and I've made my peace with it, and she's a lot better today. Anyway, one morning, I remember waking up and going into my mum's room and seeing a strange man in bed with her. Nothing completely unusual, just another date that I'd probably never see again. However, since then the date, John, never really left our lives, and he and my mum just ended up dating. John was actually nice at first and would let me and my sister, who's 6 years older than me, stay at his house when my mum did, and he would give us sweets and all sorts of stuff. However, eventually, and I can't really remember when, John began to become abusive. Honestly, I was so young and it all feels like a blur now, but I can recall bits and pieces of information, and I remember him and my mum getting into arguments, and he would break stuff around the house and at points even hit my mum. Later on, I learned that he did stuff like rip my mum's earrings out and hold a samurai sword to her throat. Every time that they would get into a fight, he would leave at stupid times, like at 3 in the morning, and my mum would leave a bit later to go after him, I assume, which would leave me and my sister, then 13, to look after me and get me ready for school and whatnot. After school, I would walk out to see both John and my mum in the car just waiting for me, and I would always feel dread because he would still be in our lives. Now, you might think that that would be the creepy part to this story, but no. You see, John was in this organization or club for men. I don't want to say the name of it here because of anonymity reasons, but it was all very secretive. He was never allowed to talk about what happened at their meetings to my mum or even to us. Women were not allowed to join either, and the only time women could join events was the annual ladies' event that they often held, which my mum would go to. Around the same time, my nan, who lived very close to us, got into a relationship with a man named Kenny. Kenny was also a part of this organization, and him and John were very friendly with each other. And my mum strongly believes that Kenny and John actually knew each other before they knew my nan and my mum. Kenny was also very abusive towards my nan, to the point that once he knocked her tooth out. Kenny and John's friendship all came to an end one night, though, when my mum and John were visiting my nan and Kenny, whilst me and my sister were visiting our dads. What my mum remembered was that she was offering to make Kenny a roast dinner for tomorrow. She then went to the toilet, and when she came back, she heard the conversation between Kenny and John became heated. Before she could even turn around to see what was going on, she felt 2 punches to the neck. John pushed her and yelled at her to run, and when she turned around, she saw Kenny stabbing John 8 times. Somehow, they escaped out the front door with my nan, and it was only then that my mum realised that she had been stabbed in the back of the neck twice. Eventually, the police turned up and Kenny was arrested whilst my mum and John were taken to hospital. Luckily, they both survived, and we never did find out the reason why Kenny just suddenly became hostile and stabbed my mum and John, though. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was something to do with this organization that they shared. We never saw Kenny again after the court case ended, but we believe that he may have got into a psychiatric hospital. Apparently, he pleaded that a mental illness had pushed him to stab them or something. After Kenny was gone, my nan, who actually had schizophrenia, came to stay with us for a while until she felt safe and mentally sound to go back home. I really do think, too, that Kenny really did a number on her, and she was just never quite right after all that. Now, despite Creeper Kenny being gone, John was still around, which didn't make life any easier. He made life hell for us, in fact. Constantly getting angry, hitting my mum, getting angry at me and my sister. On one occasion, I remember I dropped and broke a pot of mustard on the floor, and I remember my mum and I just kind of froze because we were so terrified at how John would react. My sister, being a bit older than me, she remembers a lot of the creepy things that she caught him doing, such as sitting on my bed one night when I was at my dad's. When she asked him what he was doing, he said that where else would he be? My sister walked into my mum crying once, and she asked what was wrong, and John literally said to a 16-year-old that her mum was just sexually assaulted. He made me and my mum go for walks at midnight around the neighborhood if we made him angry. My sister can't remember why, but she once was so terrified and upset at John that she ran out of the house barefoot and ran all the way to her dad's house, which was about a 10-minute walk away. When she arrived at her dad's house, John was already waiting there and said, "I wanted to make sure that you were okay." And that really messed with my sister because she left the house before John did, and she sprinted to her dad's house. The only way that he would have made it there before her was if he ran too. My mum became very strange and weird during this time with John too, doing things that she never had done before, as if she was having some sort of mental breakdown or something. At the time, we believed it was just because John was abusive and because of the alcohol. However, in recent years, she's admitted to us that she actually believed that John was drugging her. She even ended up marrying him overnight with only 2 witnesses, both from the secret organization, mind you. She looked drugged up in the wedding photos too, and we only found out that they were married a week later. She never felt right in her time with him too, and she told us that whenever she went to the ladies' nights, she wouldn't remember the night in the slightest. One night, in fact, John made the creepiest comment towards my sister when she was around 13. They were talking about the ladies' night, and he said, "Now that you're old enough, we'll buy you a pretty dress and you can come to the ladies' night with us." My sister told me that when he said that, she felt so uncomfortable and hated the idea of it and just completely refused to go outright. He made the same comment to me when I was 10, saying that when I was a bit older, I could go. I remember being really excited about buying a dress and being able to go to the secret club that my mum often went to. But after learning about how my mum never remembered the ladies' nights, I'm pretty glad that I never got the chance to go. And I was 11 when I woke up to the sound of my mum screaming. John had passed away. He was diabetic, but was terrible at managing his insulin levels, and he just died from too much fluid in his lungs. And that was both the worst and best day of my life. I mean, I would never wish anyone dead, but when John passed away, I must admit that I felt a huge weight lift off of my chest. I know that that's an awful thing for an 11-year-old to feel. I mean, I shiver whenever I think about what our lives might have been like if he was still alive, though, and I wonder if we would have even survived. Anyway, I just want to add one more thing to the story, because on one occasion, John got beat up really badly. So badly that a couple of his ribs broke, and John got the police involved, but the culprit was just never found. A few months ago, my dad and I were talking, and he finally admitted that the person that beat up John was my dad's brother. Apparently, everyone knew, even John, but no one told the police because they all thought that he deserved it. So this event took place about 25 years ago, I'd say. So I apologize in advance if it's not as detailed as you'd like. I want to stay as true to the memory as possible, though, and I only want to share what I remember. If there are any questions or comments which trigger more details, I'll gladly flesh it out a bit, though. So, I was 7 and my younger sister was 5, and we disembarked the school bus hand in hand, excited about our first week of school, ready to tell Mum all about it. We rounded the corner for home and saw that there was no car in the driveway. Little sister was happily chatting about her teacher, new friends, and the playground, but for some reason, I just felt unsettled. Why was Mum gone? Mum was always waiting for us, usually with chopped fruit or veggies. I mean, she was ahead of the curve on that. But the no junk food rule embarrassed me as a kid, but I'm so grateful for that now. Well, maybe just the car was gone. Silly thought, but not everyone's a genius when they're only 7, right? As we reached the intersection of the porch and driveway, I knew the car was gone because Mum was gone, because the front door was shut. But we weren't latchkey kids, although that was quite normal in our neighbourhood, I must admit, but I did have a house key, just in case. I'd always wondered what our parents had meant by giving us this key, but this must have been the case. I released my little sister's hand and knelt down to fish the key out of the bottom of my pouch of my backpack. I was a little nervous, I must admit, but proud, I remember. And when I rose to unlock the door, I froze. Looking down on us from inside the house was a figure dressed head to toe in all black. To my mind now, this camouflage was so complete that there wasn't anything revealed around the eyes to indicate this person's race or anything. I stopped with the key in my hand, and although I had no intention of getting in now, the figure shook its head back and forth as if to say no. I dropped the key and urged my little sister off the porch immediately. I was at a complete loss as to what to do in this situation, so I led my little sister to the side yard where we had a tire swing and a rope swing and told her that we would just wait for Mum. This had not been part of a just-in-case conversation. When I folded myself into the tire swing, in fact, I realized that I had wet my pants. The little sister asked me what was wrong, and lying was never my strong point, so I told her that someone was in the house. She looked puzzled and said to me, "It's just Daddy's friend." I asked her how she knew, and she answered that she just did. I told her that we would wait for Mum anyway, but that was weird. I don't know how long it was that we waited. I was frightened, hungry, and uncomfortable in my wet pants. Whoever was in the house left from the back door because, after some time, my dog darted around the house and happily greeted us. The fence was actually being redone in the back, and everyone who lived in our house knew to put him on a chain rather than just let him run freely and escape through the gaps and all. Upon Sonny's arrival, little sister was ready to go in, and I was not. We argued in the way kids do, exchanging witty insults such as dumb and stupid head, but I was able to win the battle due to the merit of my age. Eventually, Mum finally pulled into the driveway, and Sonny and I beelined straight to her. I'd given in to the tears that I'd been repressing, and the only thing that shocked me out of my hysterics was Mum urging me to come into the house. I managed to finally tell her about the man in black, and little sister chimed in with Daddy's friend, and then Mum ushered all of us back into the car, even Sonny, and drove a few blocks to a friend's house. The police were called, and we were questioned together and separately, and we were left with Mum's friend while she and the officers walked through the house and all. There had been a break-in focused on the basement, Dad's territory, and my parents' bedroom. But, strangely enough, if anything was gone, Mum didn't know what it was, and Dad feigned innocence in relation to his friend. Nothing like this ever happened again after this, and when I asked Mum if she remembered it, she told me that the past is better left there. Honestly, I've never been that scared since, and I hope I never will be again. This is my dad's story, and just to explain, he's ex-British Army and not scared of anything, and super practical. So, he became a lorry driver about 1975, I think, and this was not long after he started. So this happened about 5 a.m. on a summer's day. It was a bit misty like you get some mornings early, but it was bright and he was heading out of London on the A3. He's driving his lorry and up ahead was a young woman, early 20s in a long blue dress, just standing by the side of the road. It must have been before the A3 was duelled and all the barriers were put up. Anyway, so Dad sees her and thinks that she's just waiting for a ride to work or something. But just as he's about to pass her, though, she jumps in front of his lorry and he immediately slams on the brakes as he's sure that he's hit her now. But he didn't feel a bang, but where else could she have been, right? A couple of cars stop to see what's going on, and Dad shakily explains what happened, and the drivers kindly offer to stay while he looks for her under the lorry. But Dad looks, and she's not there. Other drivers look, and there's nothing. No body, no blood, and no sign of anyone. They all freak out a bit because they saw the woman too, and then just decide to leave because it was the best idea that they had. He still can't explain it, and he knows that she was there and he even hit her. And he spent the rest of his driving career avoiding that route. So, I haven't actually told anyone about my experience with the ghosts at my dad's old house, and I haven't formally discussed it in years, I think. But my dad bought a beautiful home back in 2004 and 2005 that had a huge backyard and rested in a quiet neighborhood. The area had no historical significance that I'm aware of, but I've not researched anything since living there, so I'm not too sure. After moving in, I explored the backyard a couple of times, and I found a path out in the middle of the garden that looked old. If you followed it, it led to this old run-down shed, or at least remnants of some shed of some sort. I always felt like there was some connection with our house or property to this old run-down shed hidden in the woods too, but I could just never really explain it. My dad and I were not believers in ghosts or anything, as he was raised Catholic by his parents, and he raised me the same way. We didn't watch any paranormal shows, but we did watch a scary movie or two that we enjoyed once in a while. At the time my dad purchased this house, he got married shortly after that to his wife, and she brought along her younger son. They moved in with my dad, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Over the next year, their marriage was failing terribly, to say the least. Lots of fighting was occurring, and I was always filled in by my stepbrother when I came over on the weekends to visit. I'll never forget a night when I went into the kitchen and my stepbrother followed me in like usual. He discussed the possibility of divorce with my dad and his mum, but also brought up some really weird things that had been happening around the house. He described to me that he would be playing video games with his door open, and he kept seeing things out of the corner of his eye. He also said that he would hear someone walking around on the carpet in the hallway, but no one would be there. I immediately dismissed everything he told me, though, because I thought that he was just trying to scare me or something. Fast forward a couple of weeks later, and my dad's now ex-wife moved out of our house and took her son with her. We had some empty rooms in our house now, with one being right next to my bedroom. But the house was laid out very long horizontally, if that makes sense. My bedroom and the guest was on one side of the house, the living room and the kitchen in between, and then the other side of the house had my dad's room and another guest room. There was just one long hallway that connected the two sides of the house, and I came to eventually despise it too. So I began to see things out of the corner of my eyes when I visited my dad too. Just sudden things moving, and by the time I looked there was nothing there. At night, I would hear sounds of what I didn't want to admit was footsteps in the hallways outside my bedroom, but I had to after a while. Just little weird things that eventually I couldn't ignore any longer. Finally, one weekend, I confront my dad about what I've been experiencing, just to have him confirm the experiences from him too. We began documenting things around the house in a Word document, just for reference, and I wish I still had it, but I lost it at some point. There were shadows, voices, footsteps, lights turning on and off without anyone even being there, and I would be lying if I said that I wasn't scared. I became terrified of the empty room next to my bedroom in particular, as I began to hear people walking around against the wall and talking softly in the room in the middle of the night. I would be so scared that I would stay up all night until the sun came up the next morning, and I blared my radio or TV to drown out the terrifying sounds that I could just never explain. As the activity heightened, I began to share my stories at school with my friends, who began to laugh at everything that I said. One weekend, I planned on having a friend to come see for herself the activity that was occurring in the house. She came inside and made her way to my room, and she dropped her bags off in my bedroom. We came into the living room, which was still very close to my bedroom, and she began to belittle the activity in the house, claiming that it wasn't real. A side note too, since I was terrified of the empty bedroom, I kept the door closed at all times when I was home. So, she continued on making fun of me until we heard a doorknob in the hallway turn and the creak of a door open. You bet that I almost needed new pants when I peered down the hallway to find the door to the empty room was half open. The activity in the house escalated, in fact, to the point where my dad and I actually got a local paranormal team associated with TAPS to come and investigate for our peace of mind. And their findings coincided with ours too, and they mentioned that they believed it was all children spirits. Nothing bad that they can tell was present, and honestly, I never felt like they wanted to hurt me. The activity was always just really playful and was similar to children acting like they would to get attention or something. In fact, we actually ended up catching an EVP of a little girl's voice the weekend of the investigation, and that chilled my body to the core, and still does in fact. Anyway, the activity continued after the investigation too, and I became more restless. It became frustrating for me to visit my dad's house, in fact, and it was really taking a toll on my relationship with him and my personal health. I would be terrified to stay in the house alone, let alone stay the night for the weekend, and I know it's silly to still be scared over children ghosts, but I still don't know who or what they were. I stayed a typical weekend at my dad's, and this weekend, I was absolutely terrified with heightened levels of activity. And at that point, I was done. I was done being scared and keeping my rosary on my doorknob, and I was done being too scared to go to sleep. So one night, I came out into the dark hallway in the middle of the night, and I thrusted myself into the dark, empty room next to mine. I switched on the lights and yelled out forcefully, "You're not allowed to scare me anymore. You're not welcome here. You need to leave. You need to move on and go find your own family and leave me alone." My heart was pounding as I ran out of the room and quickly switched off the lights and slammed that door shut. What happened after this, I will never, ever forget. I began to dream that night, and it was not a typical dream. And I'm not sure what to call it, but when I was dreaming, I woke up in my room exactly as I left it when I fell asleep. I looked around my room and saw that my nightlight was on and my radio was still quietly playing. I mean, it literally looked exactly like my room at night, but somehow I knew that I was dreaming or something. So I looked towards my door and watched it slowly open to reveal these 3 children just standing in my doorway looking at me. There was an older girl, maybe around 10, a younger girl, maybe around 5 or 6, and a younger boy, maybe around 5 or 6 as well. And they just sat there, staring at me. And the best way I can describe their look towards me would be the look of people in the 1800s gave when they were taking a picture. They almost looked so sad, but also like they had no emotions at all or something. Their outfits looked to be late 1800s maybe, or early 1900s from what I remember. And they just sat there, staring at me for what seemed like an eternity. Until they just looked down the hallway, turned and walked away. That's where my dream ended, and I frantically woke up in a sweat to just find my room looking exactly like it did in the dream, but my door was closed. I never did get out of bed to check the hallway, and to be honest, I'm glad that I didn't. After that night, all the activity just pretty much ended as far as I can tell from my dad, too. I never did hear anything again at that house, and the tenants after us reported no activity either. But to this day, I'm not sure what I encountered, or I'm not sure if I was actually having a dream or if it was real or not. I've always felt sensitive ever since that experience too, and I always feel like I occasionally have these odd dreams similar to what happened to me in that house. It was just so real, but I knew that I was sleeping. Anyway, let's just say that my dad and we definitely believe in ghosts now to this day, and we still can't explain what happened to us back